What would you do if you found $2,000 in cash, and keeping it meant your sick mother lives? She stood in the rain, soaking wet, $11.43 in her bank account, holding a wallet stuffed with more money than she'd seen in 3 years. One decision, 1 second, one choice that nobody would ever know about. She put it back. That single moment of honesty didn't just save her soul. It cracked open the life of one of New York's most powerful, most broken men. And nothing would ever be the same for either of them. The rain came down sideways that Tuesday morning in October, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack, sharp and cold, needling through jacket collars and pooling in the cracked sidewalk seams of lower Manhattan like the city itself was bleeding. Nora Whitfield had left her apartment on 181st Street at 6:47 a.m. with a broken umbrella, a MetroCard with $2.25 left on it, and the specific dread of someone who already knew how the day was going to go before it started. She'd been awake since 3 a.m. Not by choice. The hospital had called at 3:04, a nurse named Patricia with a voice too calm for what she was saying, to inform Nora that her mother, Eleanor Whitfield, 61 years old, had experienced another episode during the night. Cardiac arrhythmia. Not the first time. But the doctor wanted to run a new round of tests, a specific echocardiogram that their insurance, the bare minimum plan Nora paid $218 a month for and could barely afford, didn't cover. $4,700. That's what the billing coordinator had estimated when Nora called back at 3:30 a.m., sitting in her kitchen with the overhead light humming that nervous electrical hum it always made when the building's power dipped. $4,700 for tests to tell them what was already going wrong inside her mother's chest. Nora had $11.43 in her checking account. She'd looked at the number so many times in the past week that she'd stopped feeling anything when she saw it. It had become less a number and more a verdict. She was on her way to a temp agency in Midtown, her third visit in 2 months. The woman who ran it, a sturdy woman named Deborah, who wore too much rose gold jewelry and spoke in the tone of someone always slightly disappointed, had called yesterday to say there might be a data entry position opening up. $12 an hour, no benefits. 3-week contract. Nora had said thank you like it was a gift. She was walking fast, head down, trying to move through the rain in the particular way New Yorkers learn. Not fighting it, just accepting it, existing inside it like it's simply weather and not a personal insult. When her left foot caught something on the corner of West 48th and 6th Avenue, she looked down. A wallet? Brown leather. No. Closer to cognac, really, the specific warm amber color of expensive things. Thick, lying face down in a shallow river of rainwater collecting along the curb, half tucked against the base of a trash can like someone had set it down and forgotten it, or dropped it in a hurry, or... Nora stopped walking. She stood there for a full 3 seconds, rain drilling the back of her neck, people splitting around her on the sidewalk the way pedestrian traffic always does around anything that stops moving. A woman in a yellow slicker said, "Excuse me," without meaning it. A man in a suit walked directly through a puddle without looking down. Nora picked up the wallet. It was heavier than she expected. The leather was so fine it felt almost soft, the way certain things only feel when money has been spent on them without apology. She turned it over. No scratches on the face. A small embossed symbol in the lower right corner. 2 letters intertwined, AK. But no brand name. Custom, then. The kind of thing you had made. She opened it. The first thing she saw was cash. Not a little cash. Stacked, organized, clipped together. She counted it quickly, standing there in the rain, water starting to bleed through the seams of her canvas sneakers. 100, 200, 500, 800, 20 crisp hundreds, and a handful of 50s. Somewhere in the range of $2,000, possibly more. Nora's hands went very still. $2,000. She did the math automatically, the way poor people always do, the way calculating becomes a reflex, not a choice. $2,000 would cover 3 months of her mother's medication copays. $2,000 would keep the lights on through February. $2,000 was exactly, almost to the dollar, what she needed to prevent the worst of what was coming, to buy a little more time, to breathe for 1 month without the tightness in her chest that she'd started to think of as just her normal resting state. She looked up. The corner was crowded. It was always crowded here. This was Midtown. There were always hundreds of people, but nobody was running back. Nobody was looking for anything. No one was patting their pockets with that sudden, horrible blankness of realizing something was gone. She looked back down at the wallet. Behind the cash, tucked into a clear card sleeve, was a driver's license. Adrian Michael Kingsley. Date of birth, March 14th, 1992. Address, 5 East 73rd Street, New York, NY 10021. The photo showed a man with dark hair, strong jaw, eyes that looked directly at the camera, with the particular expression of someone who did not enjoy having their picture taken. He didn't look cruel. He didn't look kind, either. He looked controlled, like someone who had decided a long time ago exactly what they were going to show the world. Nora knew the name. Adrian Kingsley wasn't on the level of household recognition. He wasn't a celebrity, didn't court cameras, didn't appear on magazine covers with his shirt off. But if you'd spent any time in New York business circles, even the edges of them, you knew the name. Kingsley Capital, the foundation he'd started after his wife died. The profile in the Times 2 years ago that Nora had read in a waiting room somewhere, a long piece about how he'd rebuilt his company after some kind of scandal, though the details had been vague. 32 years old and worth, the article had said, though Nora couldn't remember the exact figure, something with a billion. She stood on the corner of 48th and 6th with $2,000 in her hand and the ID of a billionaire, and she thought, very clearly and without drama, nobody would ever know. The thought wasn't shameful, it was just honest. She was alone in a crowd, the money was wet and unclaimed, and the man who owned it would barely notice it was gone. He probably spent this much on a single dinner, on a tie, on some piece of furniture she'd never be able to afford, even on her best year. This was nothing to him. This was potentially everything to her. She thought about her mother. She thought about the $4,700 test. She thought about sitting in the hospital at 3 a.m. with a humming light above her head. And then she thought, and this was the part she couldn't fully explain later, not even to herself, she thought about who she'd been before all of this, before the bills and the temp work and the constant low-grade panic, before she'd stopped carrying her camera. There had been a version of Nora Whitfield who believed that doing the right thing wasn't naive, that integrity wasn't a luxury only rich people could afford because they had nothing to lose by it. She wasn't sure that version of herself still existed. She was about to find out. Nora tucked the wallet inside her jacket, pulled out her phone, and Googled Kingsley Capital New York address. Tomk. The building was on Park Avenue in the 40s, 47 stories of glass and steel that caught the gray October sky and threw it back as something harder and more deliberate. Nora had walked past it before without registering it. Now she stood on the sidewalk in front of it and felt, for the first time, genuinely intimidated. She was wearing her best interview clothes. Dark trousers she'd had since 2019, a gray blouse with a small stain near the second button she'd tried to cover with a cardigan, canvas sneakers that were now soaked through. Her hair was wet. She was holding the wallet in both hands inside her jacket. The lobby was the kind of lobby that makes you feel like you've made a wrong turn. Marble floors. Security desks staffed by 2 men in suits who looked at her the way people in lobbies like this always look at people like Nora. Not hostile exactly, just professionally skeptical, like they were calculating the probability that she belonged there and coming up short. "Can I help you?" The closer one, young, neat haircut, name badge reading Derek, spoke with the particular politeness that is very close to dismissal. "I'm here to return something," Nora said, "to Adrian Kingsley, or to someone who works for him. I found his wallet." Derek looked at her, then at his colleague, then back at her. "Mr. Kingsley is unavailable. You can leave the item with us and we'll make sure it—" "I'd rather give it to someone directly," Nora said, "not leave it at a desk." "Ma'am, I'm not being difficult. There's a significant amount of cash in here. I just want to give it to someone who can sign for it. Someone with a name." There was a pause. Derek picked up a phone. Nora waited. Rain had been dripping steadily from the hem of her jacket onto the marble floor, and she watched it collect in a small, mortifying puddle around her feet. A brief, quiet conversation. Derek looked at her again, reassessing. He set the phone down. "Someone will be down in a few minutes. You can wait over there." He gestured to a seating area near the elevator banks. Low leather chairs, a table with a glass vase, and a single white orchid. Nora sat. The leather was very cold. She waited 11 minutes. The elevator opened, and the woman who stepped out was approximately 40, black, with natural hair pinned up neatly and the kind of professional composure that comes from years of managing the chaos around powerful people. She was dressed impeccably, and she walked fast, without wasted motion, crossing the lobby with the focused energy of someone who had 17 other things to do. "Ms. Whitfield?" She extended her hand. "I'm Camille Torres, Mr. Kingsley's chief of staff. I understand you found something." "His wallet!" Nora held it out. Camille took it, opened it, and did a quick silent inventory. The cash, the cards, the license. Her expression didn't change much, but something in her shoulders relaxed by a fraction. "Everything's there," Nora said. "I didn't touch the cash." Camille looked at her. Not the skeptical look from the security desk. This was something else. More careful, like she was reading a document. "Can I ask where you found it?" "Corner of 48th and 6th. In a puddle, basically, near the trash can." "And you brought it here directly?" "I was on my way to a job interview." Nora paused. "Well, temp agency meeting. Not really an interview, but yes, directly here." Something passed across Camille's face that Nora couldn't read. "Give me just a moment," Camille said, and stepped away, pulling out her phone. Nora sat back down in the cold leather chair. The orchid on the table was real, she noticed. Someone had to water it. She wondered who. Camille came back 2 minutes later with an expression that had shifted into something slightly more open, like a door that had moved from closed to merely shut. "Mr. Kingsley would like to thank you personally," she said, "if you have a few minutes." Nora looked at her. "Personally?" "Yes." "Okay," Nora said. The elevator went to the 41st floor without stopping. Nora watched the numbers tick up and had the particular feeling of being in a movie she hadn't agreed to be in. The doors opened onto a hallway with the quiet of expensive carpeting and frosted glass panels, and Camille led her past a series of offices and through a set of heavy doors into an anteroom, and then, after a brief knock, into the office itself. It was a corner office with 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, which was still gray and rain-sheened and looked, from up here, almost beautiful. The rain looked like texture from this height, not like cold water that got into your shoes. Adrian Kingsley was standing with his back to her, looking out at it. He turned when they came in, and Nora's first thought was that the driver's license photo had done him a disservice, or maybe an injustice, depending on how you looked at it. He was taller than she'd expected, dark circles under his eyes that the photo hadn't captured. He was in a suit jacket and dress shirt, collar loosened, and he had the slightly rumpled look of someone who had either been in the office since very early or hadn't left it since the night before. He didn't smile when he saw her. He just looked. "Ms. Whitfield." His voice was lower than she'd expected. Not unfriendly, just precise. "I'm told you found my wallet." "On 48th Street. "Yes." He walked toward her. Not quickly, not with any particular warmth, but with the kind of deliberate movement that made you aware of how much space he occupied, and held out his hand. Nora shook it. His grip was firm, without being performative. "You could have kept it," he said. "Matter of fact. Not accusatory, just a statement." "I know," Nora said. $2,400 in cash. I figured it was somewhere around there. I didn't count carefully. Most people would have counted carefully. I didn't want to count carefully, Nora said. It seemed like it would make it harder to give back. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with those dark eyes that gave nothing away. "Can I offer you something? Coffee? Water?" "I'm okay. I have somewhere to be." "The temp agency," he said. Nora blinked. "Camille told you. She tells me most things." He moved toward his desk, not to sit behind it, just to lean against the corner of it, which shifted the dynamic in the room slightly, made it feel less formal. "What kind of work do you do?" It was an odd question, delivered without any particular inflection, and Nora wasn't sure how to answer it. Right now, whatever's available, data entry mostly, administrative work. She paused. I used to be a photographer. What kind? Documentary mostly. I had a show, a small show, a gallery in Brooklyn 4 years ago. After that, she stopped. She didn't know why she was telling him this. Things changed. Things, he repeated, not pressing but leaving the word open. My mother got sick, Nora said. Medical bills. I put the camera down and picked up whatever paid. He nodded once, like the explanation confirmed something he'd been wondering about. I'd like to offer you a job, he said. Nora stared at him. I'm sorry? Executive assistant. My current one is leaving at the end of the month. She's relocating to Chicago for her partner's work. The position comes with full benefits, a salary of... He named a number that Nora did not visibly react to, though something inside her did something she didn't have a name for. And you'd be working directly with me and Camille to manage operations. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Why? She said finally. I just told you. My assistant is leaving. That's not why. You have HR for that. You have a process. She looked at him steadily. You just met me in a lobby 30 minutes ago. Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, like a card being turned over. You have integrity, he said. It's less common than it should be. That's a nice thing to say, but it's not a reason to hire someone. It is for me, he said. There was a weight to it, not dramatic, not over-explained, just heavy. Like the sentence had something underneath it that she wasn't seeing yet. I'd need to think about it, Nora said. Of course. He reached into his desk drawer and set a business card on the surface. Camille's contact information is on there as well. Take a few days. Nora picked up the card, looked at it. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Do you lose your wallet often? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd walked in, something cracked open in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but something adjacent to it, the corner of his mouth, an acknowledgement of something. No, he said. This was the first time. He said it with a steadiness that meant something. Nora filed it away. She didn't know what to do with it yet, but she filed it away. She said goodbye to Camille in the hallway. She took the elevator back down to the marble lobby. She walked out onto Park Avenue where the rain had finally started to ease into a gray drizzle, and she stood on the sidewalk with a business card in her hand, and the number he'd said still sitting in her chest like something she'd swallowed and hadn't fully processed. She didn't go to the temp agency. She walked to the hospital instead. Her mother was awake when she got there. Room 412 at Mount Sinai's cardiac ward. A room with a window that faced a brick wall and a television bolted to the ceiling that only got 7 channels. Eleanor Whitfield was 61 years old and had been beautiful in the way some people are beautiful when they don't know it and don't think about it. And she was still that, even with the monitor leads attached, and the hospital gown and the particular exhaustion of someone whose body had been arguing with her for 2 years. She looked up when Nora came in. You're soaking wet, she said. This was her greeting. This was always her greeting, regardless of context. I got caught in the rain. Nora dropped into the chair next to the bed and set her bag on the floor. How do you feel? Like someone sat on my chest. Eleanor's voice was dry. The doctor came in this morning, young man, looks about 16. He explained my heart to me like I was a second grader, and I let him because I didn't have the energy to correct him. What did he say? What they always say. More tests. This one's a... She waved her hand. An echo something. Echocardiogram. That. Eleanor looked at her daughter with the particular clear-eyed gaze of a woman who had survived enough to know when she was being protected from something. How much? Mom? Don't mom me. How much? Nora looked at her hands. Around 5,000. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped its steady, indifferent rhythm. I don't want you to worry about that, Eleanor said, which was such a profound statement of unreality that Nora almost laughed. "I'm not worried," Nora said, which was an equal and opposite unreality. They sat in the comfortable dishonesty of it for a moment. "Something happened today," Nora said finally. She told her mother about the wallet. All of it. The rain, the corner, the cash, the name on the license, the lobby, the orchid, the man with his back to the window who spoke like every word was deliberate. She told her about the job offer. Eleanor listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Nora finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, looking at the brick wall through the window. "What does your gut say?" she asked. "My gut says it's strange." "Strange how?" "Strange like, not random, like the whole thing was too specific." Nora paused. "He said it was the first time he'd lost his wallet. He said it like it meant something." Eleanor turned to look at her. "You think he dropped it on purpose?" "I don't know. Maybe. I don't know why he would." Nora picked at a thread on the arm of the chair. "The money he offered, it would cover everything, all of it. Your tests, 3 months of medication, probably some of the back bills." "Don't take a job because of my bills," Eleanor said sharply. "I know." "Nora, I mean it." "I know, Mom." Nora looked at her. "But what if the job is also... what if it's genuinely a good opportunity? Am I supposed to turn it down because I want it for the wrong reason?" Eleanor considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Outside in the hallway, someone was being wheeled past on a gurney, wheels squeaking steadily on linoleum. "There's no such thing as wanting something for the wrong reason," Eleanor said finally. "There's only what you do with what you want once you have it." Nora sat with that. "He looked lonely," she said quietly, not as a conclusion, just as an observation. "Most powerful men do," her mother said. "It doesn't mean you can fix it." "I know. But it also doesn't mean you can't work for him." Nora almost smiled. "Since when are you pragmatic?" "Since about the 4th hospital bill," Eleanor said. "Go get me some of that terrible vending machine coffee and tell me more about this man." Nora spent 3 days deciding. She spent the first day researching. She sat in the cramped room of her apartment, a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor with a radiator that clanked and windows that let in more cold than light in October. And she Googled Adrian Kingsley with the systematic thoroughness she used to apply to research for photo projects. What she found was layered. The business biography was clean: Columbia MBA, early career in private equity, Kingsley Capital founded at 26 and profitable within 18 months. A reputation for being difficult to work for and harder to impress. A roster of companies he'd either built or rescued. A board seat on 3 foundations. The personal biography was harder to find, which meant it had been kept that way deliberately. His wife's name had been Lily Chen Kingsley, and she died 4 years ago at 30 from a form of brain cancer rare enough that the obituary Nora found in the Times had noted it with the specific sadness reserved for things that are both devastating and unfair. They'd had a daughter, 6 years old now. The daughter's name was Sophie. There was a single photo from some charity event 2 years ago, of Adrian with Sophie, her small hand in his large one, both of them looking at something outside the frame. He was bent slightly toward her. It was a small gesture. It looked unconscious, like his body just moved toward her without thinking about it. Nora stared at that photo for a long time. She found the article about the foundation scandal on the 3rd page of search results, buried under press releases and donor profiles. 3 years ago, Kingsley's then business partner, a man named Graham Voss, had been indicted for embezzling from the Lily Kingsley Foundation, the charitable organization Adrian had built in his wife's memory to fund research for the disease that had killed her. Voss had taken nearly $4 million over 18 months through a complex structure of falsified grants and shell contractor invoices. He'd served 2 years and paid a partial settlement. The article quoted a source close to Kingsley as saying the betrayal had been total and devastating, and that Voss had been both a professional partner and one of the people Kingsley trusted most. Nora read that part twice. She didn't know yet what it meant in the context of her wallet, but she was beginning to have an idea. She spent the second day doing something she hadn't done in 2 years. She got out her camera. It was a Canon EOS R5 that she'd bought secondhand in 2021 and had kept even when she was selling other things. She'd sold her laptop, her good headphones, her bicycle, because it was the one thing she'd held on to with the specific stubbornness of someone protecting a part of themselves they weren't ready to give up. It was in its case on the top shelf of her closet, behind a winter coat and 2 boxes she'd never unpacked from when she'd moved in. She charged the battery. She cleaned the lens. She went out into the city and shot for 6 hours. Nothing important, just the city. A man napping on the subway with his head on a rolled-up jacket. 2 elderly women arguing cheerfully in front of a bodega, one of them gesturing with a plastic bag of plantains. A kid, maybe 8 years old, jumping over every sidewalk crack, with the specific religious conviction of children who have decided that sidewalk cracks are important. She went home and looked at the photos on her laptop. They were good. Not because she'd gotten anything remarkable. None of the images were portfolio pieces. Nothing would be hung in any gallery. But because they were alive in a way that her recent work, the few times she'd tried, hadn't been. The composition was instinctive. She'd been afraid that 2 years of not shooting had cost her that particular muscle, the one that knows where to point the lens before the brain catches up. It hadn't. It was still there, just waiting. She looked at the photos for a long time. Then she looked at Adrian Kingsley's business card, which she'd been carrying in her jacket pocket and hadn't thrown away. On the 3rd day, she called Camille Torres. "I'll take the position," she said, "but I have a condition." A brief pause. "What condition?" "I need to speak with Mr. Kingsley directly before I start. There's something I need to ask him." Another pause, slightly longer. "I'll arrange it." They met in the same office. Same gray sky out the same windows, though the rain had cleared and the city looked scrubbed and raw in the mid-October light. He was standing at his desk this time, jacket off, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up when she came in. "You took 3 days," he said. "I needed 3 days." "Fair enough." He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Sit." She sat. He sat across from her behind the desk this time, more formal than before, deliberate. "I have a question," Nora said. "You mentioned... Did you drop that wallet on purpose?" The silence that followed was maybe 5 seconds long. It felt longer. He set the tablet down, looked at her with the same careful steadiness he'd had in their first meeting. "Why do you ask?" "Because you told me it was the first time you'd ever lost your wallet. Because you run a company and presumably have security protocols and don't generally walk around Midtown with $2,400 in cash falling out of your pocket. Because the photo on your license is recent. The hairstyle matches a photo I saw from a charity event 2 years ago. So it's not like you've been carrying that wallet for 10 years. She paused. "And because of Graham Voss." Something shifted in his face. The control was still there, but it moved, like a very steady structure registering a vibration it didn't expect. "You did your research," he said. "I'm careful." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Yes, just that. Just yes." "It was a test," Nora said, not a question. "Yes." She sat with it. The confirmation of what she'd suspected didn't feel like a victory. It felt more complicated than that. "And if I'd kept the money?" "Then I'd have known what I expected to know," he said. "That people, when given the opportunity and the plausible deniability, take what isn't theirs." Nora looked at him steadily. "And the job offer? Wouldn't have existed. So I essentially had to pass an exam I didn't know I was taking to be considered for a job I didn't know existed." She paused. I want to be honest with you. That makes me angry." He didn't look surprised. "I assumed it might." "Because it's not fair," she said. "I know what you went through with Voss, or a version of it. I understand why someone would come out of that not trusting anything, but testing people without their knowledge, treating them like subjects in an experiment, that's not a solution to betrayal. It's just a different kind of cruelty." "I didn't think of it as cruelty." "I know you didn't. That's part of the problem." She held his gaze. "What you lost with Voss was real. What you built with Lily's foundation and what he did to it, that was a real wound. but a wound doesn't give you the right to treat every stranger like a potential thief. The office was very quiet. Adrian Kingsley looked at Nora Whitfield for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not defensiveness. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like being recognized by someone who wasn't supposed to see you. "You said you'd take the position," he said finally, "with a condition." "The condition is that you don't test me again," Nora said. "If you want honesty from me, and I think that's actually what you want, which is different from what most people want from an assistant, then you have to trust me enough to tell me things directly. No experiments, no setups." She paused. "I'm not auditioning for anything. I'm either the right person or I'm not." He looked at her for another long moment. "Agreed," he said. "Just like that? You make a sound argument." "I made an argument. I don't know if it was sound." The corner of his mouth did the thing again, that not quite smile. "Start Monday," he said. Good. She took the subway home and stood in her kitchen and ate cereal for dinner because she was too tired and too overstimulated to cook anything real. And she sat at the table and looked at the list of her mother's bills she kept taped to the refrigerator door, the specific kind of self-torture that is also a motivational tool. And she thought about a man in a 41st floor office with $2,000 in cash, and a dead wife, and a 6-year-old daughter, and a story she didn't have all the pieces of yet. She thought about what he'd said. "I assumed it might," when she told him she was angry. The acknowledgement without apology. The willingness to sit inside her anger and not deflect it. She thought about the photo, the small hand, his body bent toward his daughter without thinking about it. She thought about the orchid in the lobby that somebody had to water. She thought about Lily Kingsley, who had been 30 years old and had a daughter and a husband and a disease the size of a walnut in her brain, and who was now an echo. A foundation with a beautiful name, a ward of betrayal, a reason a man dropped a wallet on a wet sidewalk on a Tuesday morning to see if the world had any goodness left in it. Nora put her bowl in the sink. She went to her closet. She got out the camera. She sat at the table with it in her hands, not shooting anything, just holding it, the weight of it. Familiar, like a language she'd almost forgotten. Outside, the city made its city sounds. Someone honking. Music from somewhere. The particular compressed noise of 11 million people existing in close proximity, most of them carrying something they weren't sure how to put down. Things changed, she'd told him, when he asked why she'd stopped. She'd told him the easy version, the version that was true but incomplete. The fuller version, the one she hadn't told anyone in a long time, was that she'd stopped because she'd been afraid. Not of failing, of the opposite. The show in Brooklyn had been good. A curator from a major gallery had approached her afterward, left a card, said he wanted to talk. And Nora had looked at that card and felt, underneath the excitement, a terror she couldn't explain. The specific fear of someone who has been surviving and doesn't know how to exist in any other mode, for whom success starts to look like something that will take away the armor she's built from difficulty. She'd called the curator twice. He hadn't picked up. She told herself it was a sign and put the camera away and gone back to surviving. She wondered what it said about her that the thing it had taken to pick the camera back up was a man on a rainy corner with a test she hadn't known she was taking. She didn't have an answer to that. She didn't think she was supposed to yet. She set the camera on the table. Monday, she told herself. Start Monday. She fell asleep at the table somewhere around midnight, her head on her arms, the camera in front of her like a compass pointing somewhere she hadn't decided to go yet, but was beginning to think she might. Monday arrived the way most Mondays do, without ceremony, with traffic, with the specific indifference of a city that doesn't care what day it is or what you've decided about yourself over the weekend. Nora was at the Kingsley Capitol building at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, wearing the best version of what she owned, dark trousers she'd pressed the night before, a navy blouse she'd bought secondhand for $11 at a consignment shop on Amsterdam Avenue, and shoes that were professional-looking from a distance and slightly worn at the heel up close. She'd spent 20 minutes on her hair. She didn't know why she'd spent 20 minutes on her hair. She told herself it was professionalism and mostly believed it. Derek at the security desk recognized her. He didn't say anything about it, just issued her a visitor badge and called upstairs with the neutral competence of someone who had learned not to editorialize. The elevator felt different this time, less like a mistake and more like a decision, which was either progress or delusion, and Nora wasn't sure yet which. Camille met her on the 41st floor with the focused energy of someone 3 hours into their workday. Good. You're early. She handed Nora a key card, a company phone still in its box, and a thin folder. HR paperwork. Benefits enrollment. Sign everything with a blue pen, not black. The scanning system flags black ink for some reason that I've never had explained to me satisfactorily. Your desk is here. She gestured to a workspace outside Adrian's office. Not a cubicle exactly, more of an open station with a monitor, a second monitor, a clean surface, and a view of the hallway and the glass wall of the conference room beyond it. You'll manage his calendar, his correspondence, the correspondence that comes to this floor, not the general company inbox that goes to communications, and anything else that needs to happen before it reaches him or after it leaves him. What does that mean, after it leaves him? It means if he says something to someone in a meeting that needs a follow-up email within 2 hours, you write the email. If he promises a call and doesn't make it, you make the call. If he forgets a quarterly report is due Friday, you remind him Thursday morning, not Friday morning. Camille paused. He doesn't forget much, but when he does, it's always the thing that matters most. How long have you worked with him? 6 years. She said it without nostalgia. Go to HR first, then come back here. I'll walk you through the systems at 10. Nora went to HR on the 32nd floor, where a pleasant woman named Gina walked her through 7 forms, explained the health insurance with the specific enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved insurance, and told her the office had a coffee machine on every floor but the 28th, which was under renovation. The 28th floor coffee machine situation was a whole thing, Gina said, with the gravity of shared institutional trauma. It's being handled. Nora came back upstairs. She sat at her new desk. She looked at the 2 monitors and the clean surface and the key card sitting next to the company phone. She started to unpack it all. She didn't see Adrian until after 11. She heard him before she saw him, his voice in the conference room, not raised exactly, but carrying through the glass with the particular resonance of someone accustomed to being listened to. He was on a call, pacing, one hand in his pocket and the other moving occasionally in the air like he was physically placing ideas in space. He hadn't noticed her through the glass, or if he had, he hadn't acknowledged it. At 11:20, the conference room door opened and he came out with his jacket folded over his arm and his phone in his hand. He stopped when he saw her. "You're here," he said. "I'm here." He looked at the desk, at the organized stack of signed HR paperwork Camille had already collected, at the 2 monitors, one of which now showed his calendar for the week, color-coded, Camille's work, and one showing his filtered correspondence. "Camille walk you through everything?" "Most of it." He nodded. He looked like he was going to say something else and then didn't. He went into his office and the door wasn't closed, just ajar, which Nora took as something, she wasn't sure what, and went back to the orientation documents Camille had left her. 40 minutes later, he appeared at her desk with a paper coffee cup that he set at the corner of her workspace without commentary. Just set it there and went back to his office. She looked at the cup. It was from the cart downstairs, not the office machine. She could tell by the sleeve. She thought, okay. She drank it. We'll check. The first week was a lesson in learning the shape of someone without them telling you what shape they were. Adrian Kingsley worked early and stayed late. He was at his desk before she arrived at 8:45 and still there when she left at 6. He took his calls standing up, which was unusual. He read physical documents rather than screens when he could, printed memos, bound reports, and annotated them in a handwriting that was small and precise and slightly aggressive in its pressure, like he was leaving marks on the page on purpose. He didn't make small talk. This wasn't rudeness. Nora came to understand the difference quickly. It was more like economy. He didn't spend words on things that didn't require words. When he needed something, he said so directly. When something was wrong, he said that too, without cushioning it, but also without cruelty. He was one of those rare people who could deliver bad news without making you feel like you'd caused it. On Wednesday of her first week, she made a scheduling error. double-booked a client call over a standing meeting with the foundation's legal team that Camille had told her to treat as inviolable. She realized it at 2 in the afternoon and went directly to Adrian's open door. "I made a mistake," she said. He looked up from his desk. She explained the double booking. He listened without expression. When she finished, he said, "What's your solution?" "Move the client call to 4 o'clock and offer a direct apology from your office for the late notice." "Why 4? "Because the legal meeting typically runs an hour and 15, not an hour. Camille's notes say it always goes over." He looked at her for a moment. "Do that," he said, and looked back down at his desk. That was it. No lecture. No consequences beyond fixing it. She went back to her desk and called the client's assistant and offered the apology and moved the call. And at 4:15, Adrian appeared in the doorway of the conference room after the legal meeting and said, "The call went fine," which she understood was not really about the call. On Thursday, Camille pulled her aside in the small kitchen off the main hallway. A room barely large enough for a counter, a refrigerator, and 2 people if neither of them had strong opinions about personal space. "You're adjusting well," Camille said, which in Camille's vocabulary was essentially a standing ovation. "He's not what I expected," Nora said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. More performance, maybe. The way powerful people are usually. They're always performing their power." Camille poured coffee into a mug that read, "I survived the Q3 review" in small font, which seemed like a story Nora didn't have context for yet. "He doesn't perform anything," she said. "That's what makes him effective, and also what makes him—" She paused, choosing something. "Difficult. For the people who want to know where they stand." "Where do people stand?" "He decides based on what you do, not what you say." Camille looked at her steadily over the coffee mug. "With most people, that becomes clear over time. With you, I think he decided in the lobby." Nora thought about what to do with that and decided to do nothing with it for now. "He brought me coffee from the cart downstairs Monday," she said. "He does that sometimes," Camille said, "when he's decided someone is worth the walk." At the end of her first week, on a Friday afternoon when the office had thinned out and the light through the windows had gone amber and specific, the way it does in October when the day is almost done, Nora was finishing a memo when she became aware of someone standing near her desk. She looked up. It was a small person, 6 years old or thereabouts, in a green jacket and a backpack shaped like a turtle. She had Adrian's dark hair and her mother's eyes. Nora recognized them from the single photo she'd found, softer and rounder than his. She was looking at Nora with the particular frank assessment of a child who hasn't yet learned to disguise curiosity as something polite. "Who are you?" the child said. "I'm Nora. I work here." "Where's Diane?" Diane, the previous assistant, Nora had learned, now in Chicago. "She moved away. I'm the new one." The child considered this. "Do you like puzzles?" "I do, actually." Diane didn't like puzzles. She said they gave her a headache. "Some puzzles do give people headaches," Nora allowed. "It depends on the puzzle." "The 1,000-piece ones?" "Those too. Yeah." The child nodded, apparently satisfied with the scientific rigor of this exchange. She had one of those faces that is constantly on the edge of expression. Not blank, not performing, just alive and present in a way that some children have before they're taught to manage it. "I'm Sophie," she said. "I know," Nora said. "I've heard good things." Sophie looked skeptical. "From who?" "From around?" Which was technically true, if around included a Times profile and a Google image search. Adrian appeared from the direction of the elevator bank, slightly breathless in the way of someone who has been moving fast. He had his jacket on, which meant he'd taken it from his office rather than left it there, which meant he'd known Sophie was coming and had made himself ready in the deliberate way he had of managing appearances. "Soph!" He came to her and put his hand on the top of her head. Not a hair ruffle, just a placement, like he needed to locate her with his hand. "You were supposed to wait by the elevator." "I found Nora." He looked at Nora. Something in his face was different here. Less controlled, not exposed exactly, but porous in a way. Like the careful construction of himself allowed for more light through the cracks when Sophie was in the room. "I see that," he said. She doesn't mind puzzles, Sophie reported. Good to know. He looked at Nora. I hope she wasn't bothering you. Not at all. Nora looked at Sophie. It was a good conversation. Sophie beamed. It was the specific kind of smile that children produce when adults have taken them seriously, when they've been spoken to rather than around. It was a good smile. It went all the way to her eyes. Can Nora come have pizza with us? Sophie asked her father. Adrian looked at Nora. Nora looked back at him. I have things to finish, Nora said, which was true. Okay, Sophie said, accepting this without tragedy. But next time. Next time, Nora agreed. She watched them walk to the elevator, Adrian's hand migrating from Sophie's head to her shoulder to the small of her back as they walked, the unconscious physical tether of a parent who has learned not to take presents for granted. Sophie was talking about something, gesturing with her free hand. He was listening, not with the distracted half-attention of someone waiting to respond, but actually listening, his whole body angled slightly toward her. The elevator doors closed. Nora sat at her desk for a moment without doing anything. She thought, there it is. The thing underneath the controlled exterior and the strategic wallet and the tight handwriting on annotated memos. The thing that actually mattered to him. She'd seen it in 3 seconds of hallway, and it didn't look like a billionaire protecting an empire. It looked like a father trying very hard to be enough. She went back to her memo. The trouble started in week 3. It began with a name. Marcus Webb. She'd seen the name come through correspondence, flagged as priority, and she'd passed it to Adrian the way she passed everything, efficiently, without editorializing. He'd taken the folder and his expression had done the thing it did sometimes, a brief and almost imperceptible tightening, and she'd filed it and moved on. Then Camille mentioned Webb while walking her through foundation files. He's a board member, Camille said, from before. The word before carrying its weight. He was close with Voss. He wasn't implicated in the embezzlement, at least nothing was proven, but Adrian has never fully trusted him since. Then why is he still on the board? Camille looked at her with the patient expression of someone explaining a complicated thing simply. Because removing him would mean a public conflict, and a public conflict at the foundation means news coverage. And news coverage of anything connected to the Voss scandal means reopening a wound that the foundation has spent 2 years beginning to close. She paused. It's a calculation. A bad one, but a calculation. Adrian made it? Adrian lives with it. Camille closed the folder. Webb has been quiet for 2 years. As long as he stays quiet, the arrangement holds. The arrangement did not hold. 3 days later, Adrian came out of his office at 4 in the afternoon with a specific kind of energy. Not anger, not panic, but the controlled intensity of someone managing something that is threatening to become unmanageable. He set a printed email on Nora's desk. Webb wants a full accounting of this quarter's foundation disbursements, he said. Dated today, sent to the full board. Nora read the email. It was politely worded and completely aggressive. The kind of communication that is professionally courteous on the surface and a declaration of intent underneath. Webb was requesting internal documents, donor records, and a narrative report on the Foundation's grant selection process. All standard information, technically. All entirely pointed in context. He's building a record, Nora said. Adrian looked at her. What? This is a documentation request. He's not asking because he wants to know. He already has access to most of this. He's asking to create a paper trail of having asked, so that later, if he wants to make a claim about transparency or governance, he can show he requested this and was given it, or requested it and wasn't, either of which he can use. Adrian was quiet for a moment. You got all that from 4 sentences. It's how my landlord used to communicate before he tried to illegally withhold my security deposit, Nora said. Same energy. Something almost involuntary crossed his face. Not quite a laugh. Close. What would you do? He said. It wasn't rhetorical. Give him everything he's asked for, every document cleanly formatted within 48 hours. She held his gaze. If you refuse or delay, you give him the narrative. If you give him everything immediately and it's all clean, you take it away from him. The Foundation's books are clean, right? Completely. then the fastest response is the most powerful one. She paused. But I'd also have legal review everything before it goes out. Not because there's anything wrong, just to document that you weren't careless. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. The look she'd come to recognize as his version of real attention. Not a glance, not a scan, but actual consideration. Have Camille pull the files, he said. I'll call legal this afternoon. He went back to his office. Nora called Camille. The documents went out in 31 hours. Webb sent a brief acknowledgement and nothing else. Camille appeared at Nora's desk afterward and said, How long have you been doing this kind of work? About 3 weeks, Nora said. Camille looked at her with a complicated expression. Right, she said, and walked away. It was on a Thursday in week 4 that Adrian first said something about the camera. He'd seen it on her desk. She'd brought it in without fully thinking about it, tucking it into her bag that morning because she sometimes walked at lunch and had started shooting again during those 30-minute circuits around the block, and she'd left it sitting on the corner of her workspace and forgotten it was there. He'd stopped in front of her desk on his way back from a meeting, and she'd looked up and followed his gaze to the camera. You shoot on film? He said. Digital, Canon R5. She paused. I know it's not. I shouldn't have it at work. I'll put it away. I didn't say that. He looked at the camera a moment longer. Are you shooting again? A little. Lunch walks. He looked at her. Show me. It wasn't a demand exactly, more like a request that expected compliance, which was a distinction she was still learning to navigate with him. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera roll. She'd been transferring the best ones to her phone for editing during commutes, and held it out. He took it, scrolled through slowly. She watched him look at the photos and tried not to invest anything in whatever his reaction was going to be, and failed completely at that because the things on the phone were hers in a way that the Foundation correspondence wasn't. He stopped on one, an image she'd taken the week before of a construction worker sleeping in a hard hat on a park bench, lunch still in his lap, face completely open in the unself-conscious way of someone who'd surrendered to exhaustion in public. Behind him, through the trees, the blurred shapes of office towers. He looked at it for a while. This is very good, he said. Not this is nice. Not what a fun hobby. This is very good. Like he meant it and didn't need to add anything to it. Thank you, Nora said, carefully. He handed the phone back. The Foundation Gala is in 6 weeks. We usually hire a photographer, set event company, standard corporate work. This year, I'd like something different. He looked at her. I'd like real. The kind of images that make donors understand what the money actually does, not just how the party looks. Nora held the phone. You want me to shoot it? If you're willing, as a separate arrangement from your work here, I'll have Camille draw up a contract. You don't have to. I do, he said simply. Fair compensation isn't charity. She looked at him. He was already moving back toward his office, jacket collar slightly crooked on the left side, the way it got by afternoon when he'd been pulling at it without noticing. Adrian, she said. He stopped, turned back. She'd never called him by his first name at work before. It was always Mr. Kingsley in formal context or nothing, just eye contact and proximity to indicate she was speaking to him. He didn't correct her. Why photography, she said. For the gala. You could hire anyone. He held her gaze. Because you told me about a show you stopped doing for the wrong reasons, and because those photos are better than anything a corporate event company would produce. He paused. And because you've been carrying that camera around at lunch for 4 weeks, and you haven't stopped once to look through the viewfinder like you're not sure you're allowed to. Nora didn't say anything for a moment. I've been working up to it, she said. I know, he said. You're there. He went back into his office. Nora sat at her desk with the camera in her hands and the phone on the desk and the uncomfortable feeling of having been seen accurately by someone she was still figuring out. She opened the viewfinder. She told her mother about the gala assignment on Sunday, over the phone because Eleanor was still in the hospital, 3 more days on the cardiac ward before they'd discharge her with a new medication protocol and a follow-up schedule. That's good news, Eleanor said. That's really good, baby. It's just one event. It's your camera, Nora. It's not just anything. A pause, the specific kind that meant Eleanor was rearranging something in her head. How is he, your boss? He's... Nora looked out her apartment window at the fire escape, which had a pigeon on it that came and went without any apparent sense of territory. Complex. Is complex your word for difficult? Complex is my word for someone who has more going on than what's visible. That's the definition of difficult. No, difficult means hard to deal with. He's actually easier to deal with than most people I've worked for. He says what he means. He doesn't pretend. She paused. He just has a lot underneath it. Do you like him? Eleanor said, and her voice carried the precise maternal inflection of a question that is asking something more than what it appears to be asking. He's my employer, Mom. That's not what I asked. I know it's not what you asked. A pause. Nora. I think he's a good person, Nora said finally. I think good people can become closed when things happen to them, like a house after a flood. You repair the structure, but you're always checking for water damage. You check for it even when the sun is out. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. That's a very forgiving way to look at something that doesn't necessarily deserve forgiveness. He hasn't done anything to me that needs forgiving. He's been... She stopped. Thought about the coffee cup from the cart. Sophie in the green jacket. His voice saying this is very good, like he had no reason to say anything other than what was true. He's been decent, in his own specific way. Decent, Eleanor said, with a tone that suggested the word was doing a lot of work. Don't do that. I'm not doing anything. You're doing the voice. I don't have a voice. You have a voice, Mom. You've had it since I was 14. Eleanor laughed. The real one. The one that lived lower in her chest than the polite one. The one that meant she'd stopped performing and was just her own self for a moment. It turned into a brief cough, then steadied. Just be careful, she said when she'd settled. Not because of him specifically, just because you're back at something you love and you're doing it in close proximity to someone who noticed. That's a lot of variables. I'm always careful. You're careful about money and not careful about people. Eleanor said it without meanness. You always have been. You collect them before you've fully evaluated them. Nora thought about the photo she'd kept on her phone. Not the construction worker, a different one. One she'd taken on a lunch walk the week before that she hadn't told anyone about. The subject hadn't been the city. It had been the view from the street up toward the 41st floor of a particular building on Park Avenue, the way the glass caught the afternoon light and held it, orange, gold, and specific, like something deliberately kept. I know, she said. I'm paying attention. Good. A pause. Now tell me about Sophie. How do you know about Sophie? You mentioned her last week. You used 3 extra sentences than you needed to when you described the way she said goodbye. Nora sat with that. The pigeon had left for the fire escape. The city outside was Sunday quiet, which in New York meant maybe 70% of its regular noise. She's 6, Nora said. She carries a turtle backpack. Does she? She has her mother's eyes. Nora paused. From a photo. I never met her mother. No, Eleanor said softly. Of course not. They stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes, talking about nothing in particular. A television show Eleanor was watching from the hospital bed, a neighbor dispute in the apartment building that had gone on for 7 months and showed no sign of resolution. The pigeon Nora reported on as if it were a regular correspondent. The warm, looping conversation of 2 people who are each other's primary constant, held together by decades of small things. When she hung up, Nora sat in the quiet of her apartment for a while. She thought about what her mother had said. You're careful about money and not careful about people. It was true. It was also incomplete in the way that true things usually are. She was careful about people. She'd been careful about them since her father left when she was 9, since the first landlord who lied to her face, since the gallery curator who'd said, "Call me," and never picked up. She was careful in the way of someone who had been trained by disappointment to approach everything she wanted with a prepared explanation for why it was going to fall apart. The difference with Adrian Kingsley, and she was only just beginning to locate this, still circling around it, was that she didn't feel the need to prepare that explanation yet. Not because she'd decided to trust him, just because he kept being exactly what he appeared to be, and she wasn't used to that. And it was disarming in a way she hadn't expected and wasn't sure what to do with. She picked up her camera, turned it over in her hands. In 6 weeks, she would stand in a room full of wealthy people and try to photograph the truth underneath the surface of things. She'd done that once before, the Brooklyn show, and it had been the best work of her life, and she'd run away from what came after. She wasn't going to do that again. She didn't know what she was going to do instead. She just knew she was done running from it. In week 5, something broke. It started small. A comment from Marcus Webb passed through an intermediary. A board member named Susan Holt, who called Camille, who told Adrian, who said nothing about it to Nora until she noticed the specific quality of his silence on Wednesday morning. He was at his desk. She'd come in with a schedule conflict she needed to flag. She knocked on the open door. He looked up and said, close the door." She closed it, sat in the chair across from his desk, waited. "Webb is going to request an extraordinary board meeting," he said. "Before the gala, he's framing it as a governance review. Camille has the details. The concern, nominally, is about the foundation's media strategy going forward." He paused. "The real concern is me." "Meaning?" "Meaning he wants to discuss whether my dual role as both the foundation's principal funder and its executive director represents a conflict of interest in organizational structure." He said it with the flat precision of someone who has been rehearsing a sentence until it stopped feeling like what it was. "It's a move to either limit my authority over the foundation or create conditions under which I step back from it." Nora looked at him. "Can he do that?" "He has 3 votes on the board already. He needs 6. Susan Holt is wavering. She's been on the board since the beginning. She's uncomfortable. She doesn't like conflict, and Webb has been working on her for weeks." He set his pen down. "If he gets 6, the motion passes as a recommendation. It doesn't remove me, but it changes the structure in ways that would make the foundation effectively unmanageable for me. And if it's unmanageable, then I either accept a diminished role or I step away entirely. Either of which is what he wants." His jaw tightened slightly, the only visible signal of how much this cost him. Lily's foundation, the research she believed in, what Voss took from it, and what we've spent 3 years rebuilding. He stopped. "I won't let him turn it into a battleground." Nora sat with this, the weight of it. She thought about the Times article, the embezzlement, what it means to build something in the name of a person who is gone and then watch someone try to dismantle it. "What do you need from me?" she said. "I need you to find out what Susan Holt cares about," he said. "Not the official version, what actually matters to her, what she thinks the foundation should be doing that it isn't." "You want me to talk to her?" "I want you to have lunch with her. She responds well to people she perceives as outside the conflict. She won't talk to me directly right now." Webb's gotten into her head. He paused. "You'd be transparent about who you work for, but you're new. You have no history with any of this." "That's either a qualification or a liability," Nora said. "In this case, it's a qualification." She thought about it. She thought about what her mother had said about variables and proximity and things she loved. This wasn't a test. She believed that, or she was choosing to believe it, which might be the same thing. This was a man fighting to hold on to the last thing his wife had built with him, using the only tools he had available. "Okay," she said. "Set up the lunch." He nodded. "Nora." She was almost at the door. She turned back. "I know this is outside what you were hired to do." "You hired me because I returned a wallet," she said. "You already know I'm not going to pretend the outside of things is more important than the inside." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression, the careful management of it, slipped slightly, the way a controlled face does when it forgets to be controlled for 1 second. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. She left his office with the particular feeling of someone walking toward something without being able to see the whole of it. Not blind trust. She hadn't arrived at trust yet. Something more provisional than that. The decision to act as though the thing in front of you might be worth the cost of being wrong about it. Susan Holt was 63 years old, wore her silver hair in a low bun, and had founded a children's literacy nonprofit in 1998 that she still ran with the specific energy of someone for whom retirement is a foreign concept. She met Nora at a small Italian restaurant in the East 40s that she clearly came to regularly. The host knew her name, brought her water without being asked. She looked at Nora across the table with clear eyes and said, "You work for Adrian." "I do." "And he wants to know where I stand." "He wants to understand what you care about," Nora said, which isn't exactly the same thing, though I understand if it feels like it is. Susan picked up her menu, read it, set it back down. "I've known Adrian for 6 years, since before Lily died, since before Voss." She said the names with the weight of someone who has carried them for a long time. "He's a good man." "I believe that, but good men make bad decisions when they're in pain, and he has been in pain for 4 years, and some of those decisions have affected the Foundation's ability to grow." "Which decisions?" "He controls too much. Every grant decision, every hire, every public communication, it all comes back to him eventually. The structure Lily imagined was more distributed. She wanted the Foundation to be able to exist beyond both of them." Susan paused. "What Webb is doing is wrong. His methods are wrong, his motives are at least partly personal, and I don't trust him. But the governance question he's raising isn't entirely without merit." Nora looked at her. "Does Adrian know you think that?" "Adrian has never asked me," Susan said simply. "He assumes I'm either with him or against him. That's the pain talking. Lily used to call it his binary thinking, said he got it from years of risk analysis, everything either an asset or a liability." She looked at Nora steadily. "You tell me things the way they are, I'll do the same." "Yes," Nora said, "always." "Then here's what's true. If Adrian came to the board himself, not through intermediaries, not through correspondence, and proposed a modified governance structure that distributed some authority while preserving his leadership role, he would have my vote and probably 2 others. Webb's motion would fail." She paused. "But it would require Adrian to admit that some of what Webb is saying has merit, and right now I don't know if he's capable of that." Nora sat with this. She picked up her water glass. "He's more capable than he looks," she said finally. "He's just not used to being told the truth by people who aren't afraid of him." Susan looked at her with something new in her expression, not surprise exactly, more like a door opening. "That's quite something," she said, "for someone who's known him 5 weeks." 4 weeks and 3 days, Nora said. "But the first meeting was before that." Susan smiled. "The first real one, not the polite version." "All right, Ms. Whitfield, let's order, and you can tell me what you actually think he should do." So they ordered, and Nora told her. Moch. She reported back to Adrian that afternoon, sat across from his desk, told him everything Susan had said, without softening it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the office was quiet for a moment. "She thinks Webb has a point," he said. His voice was level, but underneath it something was working hard to stay level. "She thinks the governance question has some merit, separated from Webb's motives," Nora said. "Those aren't the same thing." "They feel the same." "I know." She held his gaze. "But feeling isn't analysis. And you're good at analysis when you let yourself be." He looked at her. "You're telling me to concede something to someone who is trying to take the Foundation away from me. I'm telling you that if you concede the right thing to the right person in the right way, you take away his leverage and keep everything that matters." She paused. "Lily's vision was for the Foundation to outlast both of you. That's what Susan told me. Is that true?" A long silence. "Yes," he said. It came out quieter than his other answers. "Then act like it. Build something that doesn't depend entirely on you being in the room, not because Webb's right about your intentions, he isn't, but because Lily was right about the goal." Adrian was very still for a moment. She'd said Lily's name. She'd referenced a dead woman's wishes as a reason for a living man to do a hard thing. She'd been careful about it. She hoped she'd been careful. But she'd done it anyway because it was the truest thing she could say, and she'd told him she would tell him the truth. He turned toward the window, looked out at the city. She watched his jaw work once. "I'll schedule a board call for Friday," he said finally. "I'll draft the proposal myself. I'd like you to review it before it goes out." "Okay," she said. Nora, still looking at the window. This is the second time you've pushed back on me directly. Third, she said, if you count the lobby. He turned back, the corner of his mouth, the not-quite smile. You're keeping count, he said. I'm careful about money and not careful about people, she said, which was her mother's words and also something more than that. But I'm starting to work on it. He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he picked up his pen and turned to his desk, and she understood that was her cue to leave. She went back to her desk. The afternoon light was coming through the glass wall of the conference room at an angle that made the whole floor look briefly golden. That October late afternoon light that always seems like something about to end rather than something continuing. She sat at her desk. She looked at the camera in the corner. The gala was in 5 weeks. The proposal was due Friday. Her mother was being discharged Tuesday. She had too many things to think about, and not enough room for all of them, which was, she was beginning to understand, simply the condition of being alive in proximity to things and people that actually mattered to you. She started drafting the framework for the governance proposal without being asked. She didn't mention it to Adrian. She just left the document in his shared drive under a file name he'd recognize and went home and ate something slightly better than cereal and slept for 7 hours straight for the first time in 2 months. It was, all things considered, not a bad Thursday. The governance proposal went out on Friday at 11:14 a.m., and by 3 o'clock the same afternoon, Camille had responses from 4 of the 7 board members. 3 were cautiously positive. 1, Webb, sent a 2-sentence reply that said nothing and meant everything, the specific language of someone regrouping. Adrian forwarded the responses to Nora without comment. She read them at her desk and sent back a single line. Susan Holt hasn't replied yet. He wrote back. I know, she wrote, give her the weekend. He didn't respond to that one, which meant he agreed. Susan replied Monday morning at 7:42, before Nora had even logged in. The email was 4 paragraphs, carefully worded, and concluded with her support for the modified structure and a request to schedule a full board call the following week. It was, in practical terms, the thing that made Webb's motion unwinnable. Nora read it standing at the coffee machine, phone in one hand, cup in the other, and felt the specific satisfaction of having done something that mattered in a way that wouldn't be publicly credited to her, which she'd come to understand was simply how most of the actual work of the world operated. She forwarded it to Adrian. He called her desk phone 8 seconds later. You saw it, she said. I saw it. His voice was the same as always, like level, controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not relief exactly, something more complicated than relief. The way any outcome that costs you something feels complicated even when it goes the way you needed it to. Good work. Susan did the work, Nora said. I just had lunch. You had a specific kind of lunch, he said, and hung up. She looked at the phone for a moment, then she drank her coffee. Eleanor Whitfield came home from the hospital on a Tuesday, 9 days after her discharge had been first discussed and twice delayed by complications the doctors kept describing with increasing specificity and decreasing comprehensibility. Nora took a personal day, her first, she noted, in 6 weeks of working somewhere that technically gave her 5, and drove the rental car she'd paid for with her new salary uptown to pick her mother up. Eleanor walked out of Mount Sinai at 1 in the afternoon looking smaller than Nora remembered her looking, which wasn't entirely physical. She was the same height, the same build, but something about the hospital had temporarily compressed her, the way long illness does to even the most resistant people. She was wearing her own clothes, which helped. She carried her own overnight bag, which helped more. She looked at the rental car and said, What happened to the subway? I rented a car. That's unnecessary. You've been in the hospital for 3 weeks, Mom. I'm not putting you on the D train with a duffel bag. Eleanor looked at her, then at the car. Then she got in without further objection, which was how Nora knew she was still tired. They drove uptown in the comfortable silence that 2 people develop when they have run out of things to argue about, not because nothing is left to say, but because the important things have already been said and the rest can wait. Eleanor looked out the window at the city. Nora navigated the midday traffic with the focus of someone who doesn't drive often and doesn't want to admit it. The new medication makes me dizzy in the mornings, Eleanor said at some point in the 70s. The doctor said that goes away after 2 weeks. The doctor looks 16 and is probably wrong about several things. The doctor went to Johns Hopkins. 16-year-olds go to Johns Hopkins, Eleanor said. It happens. Nora smiled at the windshield. You're feeling better. I feel terrible. I'm just feeling terrible in my regular way instead of the hospital way. Eleanor turned from the window. Tell me what's been happening. So Nora told her. The board situation, the proposal, Susan Holt, and the lunch and the email Monday morning. She told it efficiently, the way she'd learned to brief people at work. Beginning, development, outcome. And Eleanor listened with her eyes on the passing city, and when Nora finished, Eleanor said, He trusted you with something serious. He needed someone with no history in the situation. He had options. He chose you. Eleanor's tone was careful. Not leading, exactly, just precise. How did he respond when it worked? He called to say good work. Then he said I'd had a specific kind of lunch. What does that mean? That he knew it wasn't just lunch, that I'd done something deliberate. Nora changed lanes. It was his way of acknowledging it without making it into something bigger than it needed to be. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You like him. Mom, not a question, Nora. I've known you 30 years. You describe people differently when you like them. Nora drove. The traffic was doing the thing it always did in the upper 80s. Inexplicably dense for no visible reason, the city's circulatory system developing a clot at the worst moment. He's my employer, she said. You said that last time. Because it's still true. It can be both true and insufficient, Eleanor said, with the patient logic of someone who has survived enough to know the difference between what is real and what is merely technically accurate. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you what I observe. Nora did not respond to this. Eleanor did not require her to. The traffic cleared, and they drove the rest of the way in the comfortable silence of two women who understand each other well enough to leave certain things unfinished. The gala was 3 weeks out when Nora first visited the Foundation's operational office. It was a separate space from Kingsley Capital, a brownstone on the Upper West Side that Lily had apparently chosen herself before she got sick, because she'd wanted the Foundation to feel like a place rather than a department. The interior was warm and slightly cluttered in the way of organizations that have more mission than budget for aesthetics. Research papers on a corkboard, family photographs submitted by grant recipients pinned beside donor thank you letters, a whiteboard with a timeline of funded projects that went back 7 years. The executive director, a woman named Priya Anand, 40, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the focused urgency of someone managing 12 things simultaneously, met Nora in the front hallway and said, You're Adrian's assistant? I am. He said you're also shooting the gala. That too. Priya looked at her with the calibrating gaze of someone deciding how much to invest in a new person. Come look at the impact wall, she said. The impact wall was at the back of the main room, a full wall, floor to ceiling, covered in photographs and documents and printed data. Not the polished kind. The real kind. Research summaries with handwritten margin notes, letters from hospitals receiving grants, photographs of actual families not posed, not PR approved, just real people in real rooms, some of them smiling, some of them not, all of them in the middle of what the Foundation's research was trying to change. Nora stood in front of it and was quiet. There were 34 families documented there, she counted. 34 individual stories, each one attached to a specific grant, a specific research milestone, a specific piece of work that the Foundation's funding had made possible. One photograph, a woman, maybe 40, sitting at a kitchen table with medical paperwork spread out, her hand pressed flat on the top of the stack, her expression not hopeful or despairing, but just steady, the specific steadiness of someone who has decided to keep going, had been taken without the subject looking at the camera. Someone had caught her in a real moment. Who took this one? Nora asked. Priya came and stood beside her. Lily, actually, early days of the Foundation, before she got too sick to do the site visits. She looked at the photograph. She was a good photographer, amateur, but she had an eye. Nora looked at the photograph for a long time. She thought about a woman who built a foundation to fight a disease that was already inside her, who went to site visits and took photographs of families and pressed flat palms to paperwork, who planned for the foundation to outlast both herself and her husband, who knew, must have known, at some level, that she was going to need it to. Tell me about the research, Nora said. Not the official version, the real version. What it's doing and why it matters. Priya looked at her for a moment, then she pulled over 2 chairs and they sat, and Priya told her. They talked for 2 hours. Nora went back to this brownstone 3 more times in the following 2 weeks. She interviewed Priya. She interviewed 2 of the research liaisons. She spoke on the phone with a neurologist in Boston whose lab was funded by a Lily Kingsley Foundation grant, a young woman named Dr. Amara Osei, who talked about the disease, a rare neurological cancer with a tongue-twisting technical name, with the specific mixture of scientific precision and human urgency that comes from someone who chose her specialty because the disease had taken someone she loved. Most of our funding comes from major donors who write checks at galas, Dr. Osei told her, which I am not ungrateful for, but they don't always understand what they're funding. They fund a concept, they fund a feeling. If they could see what the research actually does, the mechanism of how the grant money becomes a paper, becomes a treatment, becomes a person who is alive instead of gone, I think more of them would give more and keep giving. That's what I'm trying to photograph, Nora said. The mechanism, not the party. Then you should come to the lab, Dr. Osei said. Before the gala, come see what it looks like. Nora went the following Thursday. Adrian had a board call all morning, the full board, the modified governance structure being formally ratified, Webb present and defeated in the particular silent way of someone who has lost a round and is already planning the next one. And Nora slipped out with her camera and took the train to Boston and spent 4 hours in a research lab that smelled of something chemical and specific that she didn't have a name for, watching people do extremely careful things with extremely small objects and extremely large consequences. She shot 240 frames. When she got back to the office at 4, Camille looked at her and said, "Where were you?" "Boston." Camille looked at her. "For what?" "Research, for the gala." Camille picked up her coffee mug, set it down. "Adrian knows you went to Boston?" "He will, when I tell him." "You should probably tell him." "I'm going to tell him." Camille gave her the look she'd come to recognize. Not disapproval, more like the careful attention of someone who has been watching a developing situation and is updating their assessment. "His board call just ended," she said. "He's in his office." Nora knocked on the open door. He was at his desk, jacket off, tie loosened, with the look of someone who has been professionally civil for 4 hours and is grateful to be done with it. "How'd it pass?" she asked. 6-1. "Webb's won?" "Webb's won." He looked up. "Where were you this afternoon?" "Boston." She set her camera bag on the chair across from his desk. "I went to Dr. Osei's lab, the neurologist, the foundation funds." He stared at her. "You went to Boston." "It's 45 minutes on the Acela." "Nora, look at these." She pulled out her phone, opened the photos from the lab, and held it out. He took it. She watched him scroll through. He didn't speak. He went through them slowly. The lab equipment, the slides, the careful hands of researchers doing microscopy work, Dr. Osei with her glasses pushed up on her nose exactly the same way Priya wore hers, 2 women who spent their lives looking closely at things. He stopped on one, a whiteboard covered in equations and diagrams, and in the bottom corner someone had written in dry erase marker in small letters, for LK, keep going. He looked at that one for a long time. "Who wrote that?" he said, and his voice was different. Still controlled, but something underneath it had moved. "Dr. Osei, she said they've been doing it since the first grant. It's on every whiteboard in the lab." Nora paused. She knew Lily, I think. Not well, but enough. Adrian handed the phone back. He turned toward the window. She could see his jaw working slightly, the tell she'd learned in 7 weeks of proximity. "She'd have loved the lab," he said. It was quiet. Not quite to Nora. Not quite to anyone. Nora didn't say anything. Sometimes the most important thing was to not fill the silence. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and the city dark beyond the glass, the evening light starting to come on across the skyline, and she thought about what Priya had told her at the brownstone. She planned for the foundation to outlast both of them, and what Susan Holt had said. She wanted it to exist beyond both of them, and she thought that there was a particular kind of love that doesn't need to be witnessed to be real, the kind that builds structures and foundations and whiteboards and labs that say keep going 4 years after the person they were built for is gone. "The photographs are good," he said finally. He turned back. His expression was composed again, but differently than before, not closed, just held. "The gala ones will be better," she said, "now that I understand what I'm trying to show." He nodded. He looked at her for a moment in the way he had sometimes, the direct, assessing look that she'd stopped flinching from somewhere around week 3. "Thank you for going," he said. "Someone had to." "I should have gone myself," he said. "I haven't been to the lab in 18 months. She didn't say anything to that. Just let it sit. "Will you come with me?" he said. "Before the gala. I'd like to go back." She looked at him. This was new, not the request, which was professional enough in framing, but the way he'd made it. The particular directness of it, the "I'd like" rather than "it would be useful if." "Yes," she said, "whenever you want." He nodded once, then, "There's a file on the shared drive. My notes from the board call this afternoon. Can you have them formatted and distributed by tomorrow morning?" Back to work. She recognized the pivot, had come to understand it as his way of managing transitions. The professional reframe after something personal had briefly surfaced. She didn't resent it. It was just how he moved through the world. "I'll have it done by 8, she said. She went back to her desk. The office was quiet around her, most people gone for the evening, the floor settling into the particular hush of a building after hours. She formatted the board call notes. She sent them at 7:58. Then she sat at her desk for a moment longer and looked at the photo on her phone, the whiteboard, the equations, the small handwritten note in the corner, and thought about the woman who had looked at this disease and decided the response was to build something. She put the phone away. She went home. None. The gala was on a Saturday, held in the ballroom of a midtown hotel that had been carefully and expensively decorated to feel like it hadn't been carefully and expensively decorated. Warm lighting, round tables with low flower arrangements so people could see across them. A small stage with a podium and a screen for the evening's program. 312 guests, according to the seating chart Nora had helped coordinate. $800,000 in expected donations, based on prior years adjusted for the current donor list. Nora arrived 2 hours before doors opened with her camera bag and a press credential that felt strange around her neck, like a costume piece she hadn't quite earned. She was wearing a black dress she'd borrowed from her friend Maya, who was approximately the same size and had, blessedly, said nothing editorial about the borrowing. The dress was simple and dark enough that she could move through a room without drawing attention, which was exactly what she needed. The foundation team was there ahead of her, Priya and 2 staff members adjusting table arrangements and having the specific quiet argument of people who care deeply about small details and have very limited time to resolve them. The hotel event coordinator was walking through something with the catering supervisor. A sound technician was testing a microphone on the stage with the disinterested repetition of someone for whom check, 1, 2 has long since lost all meaning. Nora walked the room for 40 minutes before guests arrived. No shots yet, just looking. She'd learned this from a photographer she'd assisted years ago, a documentary shooter named Sal, who told her, "Before you pick up the camera, walk the room until you know where the light is going to change and where people are going to stand when they don't know they're being watched." She walked and looked. She found the corners where the lighting was warmest. She found the edges of the room where people would drift when they wanted a private conversation in a public space. She found the view from the back of the room toward the stage, which in full light with the screen behind it would create the specific visual depth she wanted for the program images. She also found the place, behind a pillar near the south entrance, slightly out of sight, where a person could stand and see the whole room without being in it. Adrian arrived at 6:15, 30 minutes before doors opened. He was in a dark suit and no tie, which was, for him, a version of casual. He had Sophie with him. Sophie was in a dress the color of deep water, with her dark hair in 2 braids that she'd clearly been responsible for doing herself because they were slightly uneven and entirely charming. She was carrying a small purse that contained, as she explained to Nora immediately upon seeing her notebook, a pencil, a small stuffed rabbit named Bernard, and a granola bar in case she got hungry. "Bernard comes to the gala?" Nora said. "Bernard comes everywhere," Sophie said, with the finality of someone whose position on this matter was non-negotiable. Adrian stood slightly back and let this exchange happen with the expression he got when Sophie was in the room, and he'd allowed himself to just watch her rather than manage her. There was something loose in him in those moments, something that didn't appear elsewhere. "You look good," he said to Nora. It was direct and quiet and not particularly loaded, which somehow made it more so. "It's borrowed," she said. "Still." He glanced at the camera bag. "Ready? Ask me in 4 hours." He almost smiled. Priya came to take Sophie for the early part of the evening. Sophie was apparently a gala veteran, having attended 2 previous years, and had a system involving sitting at the staff table during dinner and reading her notebook and occasionally demanding someone explain what was happening on the stage. Adrian watched Priya lead Sophie toward the staff table, and his expression did the thing Nora had photographed twice already. That specific arrangement of features that wasn't quite at peace but was trying, visibly, to be. "Are you all right?" Nora said. He looked at her. "I'm always all right at these things." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "It's the first year the board's been stable since Voss. The first year we could run this without the legal proceedings still ongoing, without the press questions. It should feel different than it does." "How does it feel?" He looked at the room. The flowers, the tables filling now as guests began to arrive, the screen glowing softly behind the stage. "Like something I'm trying to deserve," he said. Then, as if the sentence had surprised him, he straightened slightly. "Shoot well tonight." "I will." She picked up the camera. "Go talk to your donors." He went. She started shooting. For the next 3 hours, Nora moved through the room like someone who had stopped existing as a person and become only a set of decisions. This angle, this light, this fraction of a second before the expression changed. She shot the foundation staff greeting arriving guests, the warmth real and unperformed. She shot a couple in their 70s reading the impact report together, the woman's finger tracing something on the page, the man leaning to see it. She shot Sophie at the staff table absorbed in her notebook, and then looked up when something on the stage caught her attention, and then went back down as if the thing on the stage had been evaluated and found insufficiently interesting. She shot Adrian working the room. This was its own kind of subject. He moved through 300 people with an efficiency that wasn't cold. He shook hands. He bent in to listen to what people said. He introduced donors to Priya and board members with the specific generosity of someone who understands that the point of an event like this is to make other people feel central rather than peripheral. But there was always something behind it, a slight reservation, a layer of glass between Adrian Kingsley and the room he was in. She'd seen it from the first day in his office. She was trying to photograph through the glass. She got it once. At 9:15, between the dinner course and the program, she found him standing at the edge of the room, near the south entrance, in the spot she'd identified earlier as the place where you could see everything without being in it. He didn't know she was watching. He was looking at the impact images being cycled on the screen at the front of the room. The photographs she'd taken and submitted for tonight's presentation, the lab images and the family photographs and the women with flat palms on paperwork. His face in that moment was open in a way she'd never seen it. Not the control, not the glass, just looking. Just a man watching images of what his grief had built and not managing how he felt about it for 30 consecutive seconds. She raised the camera. She took the shot. She knew immediately it was the best photograph she'd taken in 4 years. Then his head turned slightly, and he saw her, and the expression closed. Not angrily, not even consciously, just the reflex of privacy reasserting itself. But he didn't look away from her. They were 30 feet apart in a room of 300 people, and he looked at her across it with the particular stillness of someone who understands they've been seen. She lowered the camera, mouthed, "Sorry." He shook his head once. "Don't be," or something like it. She went back to work. The program started at 9:30. Priya spoke first, clear and specific and human in the way of someone who has given this speech many times but hasn't stopped meaning it. She talked about the research milestones, the families, the specific progress made this year on a treatment protocol that Dr. Osei's lab had been refining for 18 months. She didn't make it abstract. She named names with permission, and she said what the money did, not in the language of impact statements, but in the language of people. Then she introduced Adrian. He walked to the podium and looked out at the room and said nothing for what felt like a longer moment than it probably was. Lily believed that the worst thing you could do with grief was keep it to yourself, he said. His voice was the same as always, level, controlled, but it was standing next to something else tonight. She said grief that stays private becomes a wall, and grief that becomes a foundation becomes a door. She was better at that than I was. A pause. She was better at most things than I was. The room was very quiet. 4 years ago, when she died, I started building this the way you build anything when you don't know what else to do. Imperfectly, too fast, with insufficient regard for the people around me who were also trying to help. He looked out at the board members, at Priya, at Susan Holt in the third row, who was looking at him with an expression Nora couldn't fully read from where she stood at the side of the room. This year, I've been reminded several times that imperfect things can become better if you're willing to hear the truth about them. I'm grateful to the people who told me the truth. He didn't look at Nora. She was glad of it. There's a whiteboard in a lab in Boston, he said. It has Lily's initials on it. Every whiteboard in the lab has her initials. Dr. Osei told me that when she started the lab, she made a rule. Every time you start a new problem, you write for LK in the corner. So you remember that the problem has a face. He paused. Tonight, I'd like to ask you to donate not to a concept, not to a brand, not to an event, but to the face on the whiteboard, to the 34 families on our impact wall, to the research that is currently, this week, moving closer to a treatment that did not exist when my wife was diagnosed. He stopped. And to Lily, who knew how to turn grief into a door even when I didn't. He stepped back from the podium. The room applauded. Not the polite event applause, but the real kind. The kind that happens when something true has been said in a room and people respond to it with their bodies before they decide to. Nora was shooting the audience rather than the stage. She wanted the faces, the people responding to his words, the specific human expressions of recognition that happen when someone says something you've privately felt and never heard out loud. She caught 6 of them in 30 seconds. One woman, maybe 60, silver-haired, discreetly crying in the way of someone determined not to make it a scene, had her hands flat on the table in front of her in exactly the same posture as the woman in Lily's photograph on the impact wall. Nora shot it. She didn't know what it meant exactly, only that it meant something. After the formal program, during the open cocktail hour that followed, Nora found a quiet hallway off the main ballroom and sat on a bench and went through her frames. Not to edit, there was no time for that. Just to make sure she had what she thought she had. The image of Adrian at the edge of the room, the audience faces during his speech. The lab photographs cycling on the screen behind Priya. Sophie looking up from her notebook at the exact moment the applause started. She was still sitting there when she heard steps in the hallway and looked up. Graham Voss. She knew the face from a single photo she'd found in an article 18 months old. He was 60 now, maybe, with the particular look of someone who has aged badly through a specific combination of money and consequence. He was wearing a decent suit and an expression that had been calibrated to look neutral and wasn't quite succeeding. He was not a gala guest. She'd reviewed the guest list 4 times. She'd have remembered the name. But he was standing in the hallway 20 feet from her, and he was looking toward the main ballroom with a specific quality of attention that set something off in her. She stood. He saw her at the same moment, and something shifted in his expression. The manufactured neutrality cracking into something less controlled for a second before he put it back. "I don't think you're on the guest list," she said. He looked at her with the kind of look that men in his position had practiced for years, just slightly above her, not hostile, but condescending in the particular way of someone who expects deference and can't quite recalibrate when they don't get it. "I'm an old friend of the Foundation. Adrian and I have a history." "I know what your history is," Nora said. "That's why I'm saying you're not on the guest list." He studied her. And you are? I work for Adrian. She held her ground. You should go. If he sees you here, this won't go the way you think it will. And what do you think I think? His voice was smooth, the kind of smooth that comes from years of conference rooms and negotiating tables. The kind that knows how to make a sentence sound reasonable while carrying something else entirely. I think you came to see how the evening went, Nora said. I think Webb told you about the governance vote, and you wanted to see what it looked like for Adrian to have a good night after a year where you've both been working to make sure he didn't. She paused. I think you're reconsidering whether you have more moves or whether this is over. He was quiet for a moment. The hallway was marble-floored, and the sound from the ballroom came through muffled and warm, laughter and the movement of 300 people settling into the second half of their evening. You're very confident for someone who's been here 2 months, he said. 7 weeks, she said. And confidence isn't the right word. I just don't have any reason to pretend I don't understand what's happening. He looked at her with something that shifted. Not respect, not quite, but the revaluation that happens when someone behaves unexpectedly. Adrian always did know how to find loyal people, he said, and then something always happened to them. Nothing's happened to me, Nora said. Give it time. She held his gaze. If you're trying to imply that Adrian is the kind of person who destroys the people around him, I've watched him for 7 weeks. I know the file on what you did to the foundation, and I know which one of you is still building something and which one of you is standing in a hotel hallway at 9:45 on a Saturday. Something moved in his face. Anger, maybe. Embarrassment. Some combination. Tell him I came by, Voss said. He'll want to know. He turned and walked toward the exit. Nora watched him go. Her heart was moving faster than usual, though her hands were steady. She'd noticed that about herself, that her hands almost always stayed steady when it counted, which was something she'd never thought of as a quality until she'd needed it. She pulled out her phone and texted Camille. Voss was in the building, hallway off the main ballroom. He's gone now, but Adrian should know. Camille's response took 45 seconds. Good Lord. Are you okay? Fine. Just flag it for Adrian after the program. She put the phone away. She went back into the ballroom. She picked up her camera. Adrian found her at 10:45 after the room had thinned to a third of its capacity and the event staff were beginning the quiet work of clearing early tables. He came to where she was standing near the impact wall. She'd been shooting the wall itself, the real photographs and documents, catching the way donors stopped in front of it during the cocktail hour and actually read rather than glanced. He stood beside her without preamble. Camille told me, I know, I saw her tell you. He looked at the wall. What did he say? He said to tell you he'd come by. He said you'd want to know. She paused. He was making a point, that he can still access your space, that you can't fully seal him out. She looked at Adrian. It was petty. I don't think you need to do anything about it. Adrian was quiet. His jaw was doing the thing. He walked into this room. He walked into the hallway. He didn't make it into the room. Nora turned to look at him. The evening was good, Adrian. Everything that happened tonight, the program, the donations, the board ratification this week, all of it was good. Voss standing in a hallway for 4 minutes doesn't change that. He looked at her. You're very calm about it. One of us has to be. He exhaled. Something in his shoulders shifted, not fully releasing but moving toward it. He said something to you, Adrian said. Not a question. He said you know how to find loyal people and then something always happens to them. She said it plainly, without apology for the words. He'd want the truth, not the edited version. He was trying to scare me. Did it work? No. She met his eyes. I told him which one of you was still building something. He looked at her for a moment in the way he'd looked at her across the room earlier. That particular stillness of being seen and knowing it and not running from it for once. Thank you, he said quietly. You don't need to thank me. You stood in a hallway alone with Graham Voss and held your ground, and then went back into a ballroom and kept shooting. He said it simply, not dramatically. That's not nothing. She looked back at the wall, at Lily's photograph, the one she'd only just identified tonight, the woman at the kitchen table, the flat palm on the paperwork. She took this one, Nora said. Priya told me. Adrian went very still. I recognize the composition, Nora said. It's the same as the image I shot in Boston. The way the subject is slightly off-center, the way the light source is left of frame. She had an eye. He didn't speak for a long moment. He was looking at the photograph. She always said she should have been a photographer, he said finally. Instead of pre-med. He paused. She became a doctor because her father wanted it. She built the foundation because she wanted it. Another pause. She was better at wanting things clearly than I was, than I am. You're getting better at it, Nora said. He looked at her. How can you tell? You proposed a governance change that cost you something without being asked to. You went back to a board you've been fighting for 2 years and gave ground on principle rather than strategy. She looked at him steadily. And you're standing at this wall, looking at your wife's photograph without walking away from it. He was quiet. The room around them had the particular late evening quality of a good event winding down. Music lower, voices softer, the specific warmth of 300 people having been held for 4 hours in a room full of something that mattered. The Voss situation, he said quietly. What he did, it wasn't just the money. We grew up together, essentially. His family was at our wedding. He was in the hospital the night Sophie was born. He stopped. After Lily died, he was one of 3 people I told first. And then I found out what he'd been doing to the foundation before she even died while she was still alive. And I couldn't... He stopped again. You couldn't figure out where the grief ended and the betrayal began, Nora said. He looked at her. Yes. So you stopped trusting both, she said. Grief and people. I stopped trusting most things. His voice was very level. She knew what that level cost him now. And then I left a wallet on a sidewalk in the rain, like a man who had run out of better ideas. There it was. She'd known it was coming, had been circling it for weeks, sensing the shape of it without having all the edges. And now it was here, in the quiet of a thinning ballroom, with Lily's photograph on the wall, and Sophie somewhere behind them at the staff table and the city dark beyond the hotel windows. It was desperate, she said. Not cruel, just honest. Yes, he said. It was. You were testing the world, she said. Not me specifically. You needed to know if ordinary people, people with nothing, could still do the right thing when nobody was watching. I knew if the answer was no, I'd stop looking entirely. He said it with the particular flatness of someone admitting something they'd been careful not to look at directly. I was this close to giving up on the idea that people could be trusted without incentive. She was quiet for a moment. And when I came back, I wasn't sure what I felt. He turned to look at her, relieved, suspicious, aware that one person returning a wallet proved nothing statistically but felt like something, like an answer I wasn't expecting. It wasn't proof, she said. I'm not better than anyone else. I was tired and I was scared and I needed to be the person I thought I used to be. She paused. I gave it back for myself as much as for you. Maybe more. He looked at her with that directness, the quality of his attention when he stopped managing it. I know, he said. That's what made it real. They stood beside Lily's photograph in the late quiet of the evening, 2 people who had arrived at a conversation neither of them had planned, and the thing between them, the thing that had been building since a wet sidewalk in October, was there in the room with them, real and complicated and not ready to be named yet. Sophie appeared from the direction of the staff table with Bernard the rabbit under one arm and her notebook under the other, and her braids only slightly more uneven than they'd been at 6 o'clock. Dad, she said, Priya says we have to go soon, but I'm not tired. You're always not tired, Adrian said, and his voice was entirely different, softer, the glass gone. Come here. Sophie came to his side. She looked up at the wall, at Lily's photograph, at the families, at the 7 years of documented work. She'd been to these galas since she was 4. She knew what the wall meant. She didn't explain it to herself, just looked at it the way children look at things they understand on a level that precedes language. Then she looked at Nora. Did you take good pictures tonight? She said. I think so, Nora said. Your dad will have to tell me. Sophie looked at her father. Did she? Adrian looked at Nora, and the expression on his face was something she'd have to think about later, when she had the time and the quiet to think about it properly. Yes, he said. She did. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Good, she said. Bernard thinks so, too. Bernard's felt face was pressed against Sophie's arm and expressed nothing, being a stuffed rabbit. But Nora laughed. A real one, the kind that comes up before you decide to let it. And Adrian looked at her when she laughed, and didn't look away. They left the ballroom 20 minutes later, the three of them together by accident of proximity and then by some unspoken consensus. Adrian and Sophie toward the elevator, Nora collecting her camera bag from the coat check and walking with them because no one had suggested otherwise. They stood in the lobby of the hotel and waited for the car Adrian had called. Sophie had fallen asleep on her feet by the time it arrived, the specific boneless capitulation of a child who has declared they're not tired for 2 hours too long. Adrian picked her up. Sophie tucked her head against his shoulder without waking. He looked at Nora over his daughter's dark braids. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. The photographs will be excellent. You don't know that yet. I know what I saw tonight, he said simply. The car pulled up. He got in with Sophie. One smooth movement, careful not to wake her. The door closed. The car pulled away into the city, which was still going, as it always is, with the specific indifference and beauty of a thing that never actually stops. Nora stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold November air, with her camera bag on her shoulder and the evening still running through her. Voss in the hallway, the photograph of Adrian unguarded, the whiteboard in Boston for LK. Keep going, Lily's flat palm, the audience faces, Sophie and Bernard and the uneven braids. She thought about what Adrian had said. I was this close to giving up. She thought, so was I. She started walking toward the subway. The city was dark and lit and loud and indifferent, which was exactly what it always was, and she walked through it with the specific feeling of someone who has been in a room where something shifted and is now out in the world, still holding the shape of the shift. Her phone buzzed. A message from Camille. Donations tonight, $1.1 million. Previous record was $800,000. Priya is crying. Adrian doesn't know yet. Nora stopped walking for a moment, looked at the message, looked up at the sky, which was clear for the first time in weeks, the city's orange haze thinning enough in the cold to show a few actual stars. She typed back, tell him in the morning, let him sleep. She put her phone away. She kept walking. Camille told him about the donations on Sunday morning. Nora knew because he texted her at 9:47 a.m., the first time he'd ever texted her on a weekend. And the message was 4 words, 1.1 million. Thank you. She was in her kitchen in her robe making coffee, her hair still undone, the gala photographs open on her laptop on the table where she'd been editing since 7. She read the message twice. Then she typed back. That was Priya and the research and 34 families on a wall. I just pointed a camera at it. His response took 3 minutes. You know that's not accurate. She looked at the message, put the phone face down on the table, went back to the photographs. She'd been editing since before she'd fully woken up, had gotten out of bed at 6:50 with the specific restlessness of someone whose brain had kept working through the night, sorting images in her sleep, and had made coffee and opened the laptop before she'd even put on shoes. There were 240 frames from the gala alone, plus the Boston lab shots, plus the brownstone visits. She'd been through them all 3 times already, culling and rating, and she'd ended up with 31 photographs she considered worth printing. The one of Adrian at the edge of the room was among them. She'd flagged it, then unflagged it, then flagged it again. It was the best image of the night by a significant margin, technically, compositionally, in terms of what it actually captured. And it was also a photograph of a man in a private moment that he hadn't known was being taken. She'd apologized and he'd said, don't be. But there was a difference between that exchange in the warmth of an event and what it meant to include the image in a formal deliverable. She was still looking at it, at the clean lines of his profile, the specific quality of his attention as he watched the images on the screen, the thing in his face that she'd spent 7 weeks not quite seeing and then seen all at once. When her phone rang, it was him. I'm looking at the photographs, he said without greeting. His voice, had the quality it got when something had caught him off guard in a way he was still processing. She sat up straighter. "You have access already?" "Camille forwarded your edit folder this morning." A pause. "These are extraordinary, Nora." She looked at her coffee cup. "Which ones?" "All of them, but the lab series, the whiteboard, the woman in the audience during the program." Another pause. "And the one of me." She'd included it in the folder without deciding to. It had gone in with the others automatically, part of the sequence, and she'd been meaning to flag it separately and had forgotten, or had chosen to forget. She wasn't sure which. "If you want me to pull it," she started. "I don't," he said. "I want to understand it." Another pause. "I look at it, and I can't quite identify what's in my face." "You were watching Lily's photograph cycle on the screen," she said carefully. "You didn't know I was shooting." "I know. That's not what I mean." He was quiet for a moment. "I mean the expression. I don't recognize it." Nora looked at the image on her screen, at the open quality of his face in that unguarded 30 seconds. Not grief, not pride, not the careful control of the man she worked for every day. Something between all three, something that didn't have a clean category. "Hope," she said. "I think that's hope. What it looks like when it's not performed." A long silence. "That's," he said, and stopped. "It's yours," she said. "It's entirely yours. If you don't want it in the deliverable to the foundation, it stays out. But I think it's the truest image in the set." He didn't answer for a moment. She could hear the ambient sound of his apartment, the city through windows, something quiet in the background that she thought might be Sophie's voice down a hallway. "Include it," he said finally. "Are you sure? Priya will know how to use it. The donors should see what the foundation looks like to the man running it." He paused. "Lily would have said it makes me look human." "It does make you look human." "I know." And there was something in the way he said it, not self-deprecating, not performed, that sounded like someone picking up something they'd put down for a long time and finding it still fit. They stayed on the phone without speaking for a few seconds, the particular silence of two people who have said something real and are sitting inside it. "Sophie wants to know if you'll come to lunch," he said. "Today. She's decided to make pancakes, which historically goes one of two ways." Nora looked at her robe, her undone hair, the laptop and the coffee, and the apartment she'd been in since waking up. She thought about what her mother had said. You collect people before you've fully evaluated them. She thought about what she'd said back. "I'm paying attention." "What kind of pancakes?" she said. "She hasn't decided yet. That's part of the problem." "I'll be there at noon," Nora said. "Tell her chocolate chip." "She'll negotiate for blueberry." "Split the difference, half and half." He relayed this to someone in the background. A small voice responded with what sounded like enthusiastic approval. He came back. "Noon." "Noon," she confirmed, and they hung up. She sat at her kitchen table with the photographs and the coffee and the November city outside her window and thought, all right then. The way you think it when something has moved past the point of planning and into the territory of just living it. The apartment was on East 73rd Street, which she knew from the driver's license but hadn't visited before. A pre-war building with a doorman who knew her name before she said it. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. Kingsley is expecting you, 32nd floor." Which meant he'd been told she was coming, which was a small thing that felt larger than it was. The elevator opened directly into a private foyer. Sophie was already there, sitting on the floor with a mixing bowl between her legs, apparently mid-preparation despite the fact that Nora was 4 minutes early. "You're here," Sophie announced. "We couldn't agree on the batter." "What's the disagreement?" "He wants to measure things." Sophie gestured toward the kitchen with a flour-dusted hand. "I think measuring ruins the energy." "The energy," Nora repeated. "Of the pancakes," Sophie clarified, as if this were obvious. From the kitchen. "The energy of the pancakes is not a unit of measurement." Adrian's voice, dry and very slightly strained in the way of a parent who has been having this conversation for longer than he wants to admit. "But it should be," Sophie said to Nora confidentially. Nora took off her coat. She went to the kitchen. Adrian was at the counter with a measuring cup and an expression that suggested he was choosing his battles. He looked up when she came in, and something in his face settled slightly, the way things settle when a variable resolves. "She won't use the measuring cups," he said. "The measuring cups are for people who don't trust themselves," Sophie called from the foyer. "Sophie, I'm just saying what I think." Nora took off her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and picked up the measuring cup. "Here's what we'll do," she said. "Soph, come in here. I'll show you how to measure, and then you can decide if you trust it." Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, mixing bowl and arms, and looked at Nora with the evaluating gaze of a child being offered a compromise and assessing whether it's genuine. "Okay," she said. "But I make the final call." "Naturally," Nora said. They made pancakes, chocolate chip and blueberry. Sophie had accepted the half-and-half proposal with the executive authority of someone who had decided to be magnanimous. It took 40 minutes and produced more mess than 3 pancakes should theoretically require, and Sophie burned the first 2 because she insisted on flipping them herself, and had, she explained, a specific technique that required practice to appreciate. The kitchen smelled like butter and warm batter, and Sophie's explanation of her flipping philosophy, which was extensive. Adrian stood at the edge of it all and didn't help, specifically. He kept coffee cups full and moved things out of Sophie's reach when she was about to knock them over without appearing to notice he was doing it, which Nora recognized as the practiced choreography of a parent who has learned to manage chaos without naming it. He was wearing a gray sweater, and he'd clearly been working before she arrived. There was an annotated document on the kitchen table that he'd moved to the counter, and he looked, in this environment, different than he looked at work. Not unguarded exactly, but closer to it. The controlled man in the 41st floor office was still there, just unpacked a little, the edges less sharp. "You have flour on your face," Sophie told Nora at one point. "Where?" Sophie reached up and touched the left side of Nora's chin with one small floury finger, which transferred more flour than it removed. "There. Now it's bigger." "Thank you." "You're welcome." Adrian looked at this exchange with the expression Nora had photographed in 3 different contexts now and still couldn't fully name. The one that lived between tenderness and something more complicated. Something that had grief in it, the way old injuries have weather in them. The ache that comes not from the wound anymore, but from how much it healed. They ate the pancakes at the kitchen table. Sophie had strong opinions about the ratio of chocolate chips to blueberries and evaluated each bite for confirmation that the ratio had been achieved. The conversation moved the way Sunday conversation does when it's working, without direction, covering nothing important, everything alive. Sophie's school project about migratory birds, a puzzle she'd been working on, the 1,000-piece kind, and where she was stuck. A dream she'd had that involved a talking elevator and a horse, which she reported as though the internal logic had been entirely sensible. Adrian listened to all of it. He had the particular quality of attention that Sophie expected, and he gave it without making it visible, which was a harder thing than it looked. At some point, Sophie slid off her chair and went to the other room to get Bernard, who had apparently missed the pancakes and needed to be informed about them. Nora and Adrian were alone at the table with their coffee cups. "She's extraordinary," Nora said. "She's exhausting," he said. Then, "Yes, she's extraordinary." Nora wrapped both hands around her cup. "How does she talk about Lily?" He was quiet for a moment. She was 2 when Lily got sick, 3 when she died. She doesn't have real memories, just impressions. The smell of her shampoo, apparently, a specific song Lily used to sing. He looked at his coffee. She knows her mother built the foundation. She knows what the foundation does. Priya talks to her about it like she's a person, which she responds to. A pause. She doesn't ask about her as much as she used to. She's gotten to a place where Lily is present but not painful. For Sophie, for me, it's... He stopped. "Still both," Nora said. "Still both," he confirmed. Sophie came back with Bernard and a picture book she'd decided she wanted to read to Nora, apparently having made this decision unilaterally during the 30 seconds she'd been gone. It was a book about a red fox that Nora hadn't read, and Sophie had read 40 times, and she read it with the specific dramatic investment of someone who considers themselves an authority on the material. Nora listened and looked at the illustration Sophie pointed to and said the right things at the right moments, and somewhere in the middle of the fox's 3rd adventure, she became aware that Adrian had stopped pretending to look at his document and was watching the 2 of them instead. Not obviously, not sentimentally, just watching, in the way of someone who has been looking at an absence for a long time and isn't quite used to the space being filled. She didn't call attention to it. She listened to Sophie's Fox book and drank her coffee and let the Sunday morning be what it was. Eleanor came to New York in December. It wasn't a simple operation. She was still on the new cardiac protocol. 3 medications, a monthly echocardiogram, a dietary restriction that she followed imperfectly and argued about fluently, and the logistics of moving her from the small apartment in Yonkers where she'd lived for 11 years to a sublet near Nora in Upper Manhattan involved 4 conversations with her cardiologist, 2 with her insurance company, 1 with a moving company that canceled, and 1 argument between Eleanor and Nora that lasted 2 hours and covered the question of whether Eleanor was choosing to come or being relocated against her will, which was a distinction Eleanor felt strongly about. "I am choosing to come," Eleanor said on the phone at the end of the argument. "I'm just also registering that the choice was heavily influenced." "That's how most choices work," Nora said. "Don't philosophize at me." "I learned it from you." A pause. "That's fair," Eleanor admitted, which meant the argument was over. The new cardiologist she'd found through a connection Nora had made after 6 weeks of phone calls and insurance navigation, a woman named Dr. Reyes at Columbia University Medical Center who had trained under one of the physicians the Lily Kingsley Foundation had funded in a research partnership 2 years prior, saw Eleanor for the first time in the second week of December and said, with the specific careful positivity of a doctor who doesn't want to overclaim, that Eleanor's readings were consistent with the new protocol working. "Consistent with working," Eleanor said afterward. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the numbers are going in the right direction," Nora said. "It means Dr. Reyes thinks the medication is doing what it's supposed to do." The 16-year-old at the other hospital also thought the medication was doing what it was supposed to do. Dr. Reyes is not 16. "She looks 30, which for me is essentially the same thing." They were in the car after the appointment, Nora driving, Eleanor in the passenger seat in her good winter coat, looking out the window at the city moving past with the curious attention of someone who has lived near a city for 20 years and is now living in it and finds the difference interesting. "The connection through the foundation," Eleanor said. "Is that how you found Dr. Reyes?" "Priya knew someone who knew someone. And the foundation found the connection because of the research they fund." "Partly." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "So that man's wallet, in a roundabout way, found me a cardiologist." "In a very roundabout way." "Life is strange," Eleanor said, in the tone of someone who considers this a perfectly acceptable observation rather than a cliché. "Yes," Nora agreed. They drove uptown in the December afternoon light, which was thin and pale and specific to the city in winter, the bare trees on the side streets catching it and throwing it back as something colder and more defined. "I'd like to meet him," Eleanor said. "Adrian," Nora kept her eyes on the traffic. "I know. Not because of anything I'm implying," Eleanor said, which absolutely was something she was implying. "Just because you've talked about him for 3 months and I'd like to have a face for the name. I'll see." "Nora." "I said I'll see, Mom. I will." Eleanor looked at her, said nothing further, looked back out the window. She had, over 30 years of motherhood, developed an excellent understanding of when further pressure would achieve results and when it would achieve the opposite. And she applied this knowledge with the precision of someone who has learned the difference between influence and control. Nora drove. She thought about what it meant to bring 2 people into the same room, people who existed in separate chambers of her life that she'd been keeping carefully distinct. She knew it was the right thing to do eventually. She was still figuring out when eventually was. The answer, as it turned out, was a Thursday in mid-December, and it happened not because Nora had planned it, but because Sophie had. Nora had been bringing Eleanor to the brownstone twice a week, the Foundation's operational office, where Priya had asked Nora to help develop a new donor communications strategy, and where Nora had started spending more time than her actual office hours strictly required. Eleanor had come once because she had a doctor's appointment nearby, and Nora had offered to buy her lunch after, and she'd met Priya and Priya had asked Eleanor, with no visible agenda, if she'd be willing to look at some of the family correspondence they received and evaluate the language from a patient's perspective. And Eleanor had said yes with the specific energy of someone who has been resting for 3 weeks and is running out of patience for it. By the 3rd week of December, Eleanor was going to the brownstone 3 days a week. She read correspondence and made notes in a small red notebook that she carried in her coat pocket. She talked to the research liaisons about the patient experience in clinical language that was also personal and unvarnished, because Eleanor Whitfield did not do varnish. She ate lunch in the brownstone's small kitchen with Priya and the 2 staffers, and contributed opinions to conversations she'd been invited into, and some she hadn't, which Priya did not seem to mind and may have actively enjoyed. "Your mother," Priya told Nora one afternoon, "is the most useful person who has ever walked through that door. She'd agree with you. I'm going to ask her if she wants to consult part-time on the patient communications project." Nora looked at her. "You'd pay her?" "Of course I'd pay her. She's doing real work." Priya looked back at her computer. "She knows things about the patient experience that we don't know. The things she flagged in the family letters, the language that doesn't land, the assumptions we're making, that's valuable." Nora thought about her mother in the hospital. 3 weeks, 4 walls, 1 window facing a brick wall. Eleanor Whitfield reduced to a protocol and a chart and a set of readings that went in the right direction or the wrong direction. "Ask her Tuesday," Nora said. "She'll say yes before you finish the sentence." The Thursday it happened was 2 days before Christmas, when the city had gone slightly mad with the specific festive chaos of the holidays, and Nora had brought Sophie to the brownstone. This required explanation. Sophie's school had finished for the break the previous Friday, and the woman who usually minded Sophie in the afternoons, a graduate student named Keiko who came 3 days a week, had gone home to Portland for Christmas. Adrian's backup option had fallen through on a Wednesday morning phone call, and he'd come to Nora's desk at 8:45 looking, for the first time in 4 months, genuinely stuck. "I have a board call at 10 and a site meeting at 1, he said, "and I have no one for Sophie." "I have foundation work at the brownstone today," Nora said. "She can come with me." He looked at her. "Nora? She's met Priya. She likes the brownstone. There's a puzzle in the back office that's been sitting unfinished for 3 months, and I told her about it 2 weeks ago, and she's been asking about it since." She paused. "Bring her by at 9:30. I'll take her with me." He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was calculating whether to accept something he didn't want to need. Then, "Thank you." "Coffee from the cart," she said. "We're even." He almost smiled. So Sophie arrived at 9:30 with her turtle backpack and Bernard in a level of energy for a Thursday morning in December that suggested she had been awake since before it was reasonable. She surveyed Nora's desk with the critical eye of someone who takes workspaces seriously. "Your desk is neater than last time," she said. "I tidied." "Why?" "Because it was messy." "But messiness has a system," Sophie said, which was something she'd clearly heard from somewhere and had adopted as her own position. They took the subway to the Upper West Side. Sophie had very strong opinions about the subway, primarily that it was interesting and that people looked at their phones too much, and that the maps on the walls were more useful than people gave them credit for, and arrived at the brownstone at 10:15. Priya greeted Sophie with the specific warmth of someone who knows how to talk to children without talking down to them, showed her the back office, showed her the puzzle, and then came back and said to Nora quietly, "Also, your mother is here." Nora stopped. "It's Thursday." "She texted me yesterday to ask if she could come in today. I said yes." Nora stood for a moment, thought about the math of it. Sophie in the back office, Eleanor in the building, Adrian's daughter and Nora's mother in the same room before Nora had figured out the right conditions for that, the right framing, the right... She stopped the thought. There was no right framing. There was just what happened. "Okay," she said. "Where is she?" Eleanor was at the correspondence table with her red notebook, reading a letter from a family in Indiana and making notes with the focused attention she brought to everything she decided to take seriously, which was most things. She looked up when Nora appeared. "I know," Eleanor said before Nora could speak. "You didn't know I was coming." "I didn't know you were coming. I had a morning appointment nearby and Priya said it was fine." Eleanor's gaze went past Nora. Is that Sophie? Nora turned. Sophie had come out of the back office, apparently having located the puzzle, found it acceptable, and then heard voices and decided to investigate. She was standing in the doorway with Bernard in her arms and her head tilted slightly, looking at Eleanor with the frank assessment she applied to all new situations. "Hi," Sophie said. "Hello," Eleanor said. Her voice shifted, not softened exactly, but adjusted, the way people who like children adjust when they're in the presence of one. "I'm Eleanor." "I'm Sophie." Sophie came further into the room. "Are you Nora's mom?" "I am." Sophie considered this. "You look like her." "People say that," Eleanor said, "though I think she got the better version." "What does that mean?" "It means she's prettier than I was at her age." Sophie looked at Nora, then back at Eleanor, performing a visual comparison with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "I think you both look the same amount of pretty," she concluded. Eleanor looked at Nora. "I like her," she said, simply. Sophie, having delivered her diplomatic assessment, went to the table and sat across from Eleanor and put Bernard on the surface between them. "What are you reading?" "Letters from families," Eleanor said. "People who have been helped by the foundation." "My dad's foundation?" "Your dad's foundation." Sophie looked at the letter. "Can you read me one?" Eleanor looked at Nora. Nora sat down at the table and said nothing because nothing was needed. Eleanor picked up the letter from Indiana, not the one she'd been reading, a different one she'd already reviewed and marked and apparently decided was appropriate, and read it aloud in the clear, even voice she'd used when Nora was small and they'd read together at night. It was a letter from a woman named Patricia, 44 years old, who had been diagnosed with the same rare neurological cancer that had killed Lily Kingsley. She'd participated in a clinical trial funded partly by a Lily Kingsley Foundation grant. The trial hadn't cured her. The letter was clear about that, honest about what was still uncertain, but it had given her 2 additional years that the original prognosis hadn't included. She'd watched her son graduate high school. She'd been at her daughter's wedding. She'd seen her first grandchild born. Sophie listened without interrupting, which was unusual. Her face was still and attentive in a way that was older than 6, the way children look when they're absorbing something they don't entirely understand but feel the weight of anyway. When Eleanor finished, Sophie was quiet for a moment. "She got more time," she said. "Yes," Eleanor said, "because of the research." "Because of the research." "And the people who funded it." Sophie looked down at Bernard, at something she was working through quietly. Then she looked up at Eleanor. "My mom had the same sickness," she said. It wasn't sad exactly, not theatrical, just a fact she carried and knew how to hold. "I know, sweetheart," Eleanor said. "The foundation was built for her." Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact. "So other people don't have to not have more time." Eleanor's expression moved, just briefly, into something that was not quite controlled, the way faces move when children say the truest version of a thing that adults have been saying in more complicated language. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." Sophie nodded once. Then she picked up Bernard and slid off the chair. "I'm going to finish the puzzle now," she announced, and went back to the rear office with the specific purposefulness of a child who has processed something and decided the next right action. Nora and Eleanor sat at the table. "Well," Eleanor said quietly. "Yeah," Nora said. They didn't say anything else for a moment. From the back room came the quiet sound of puzzle pieces being sorted, Sophie humming something to herself, the small domestic sound of a child at work on something she'd decided was important. Adrian came to the brownstone at 4:30 to pick Sophie up. Nora had texted him the address at noon with a brief update. "She's fine, working on a puzzle, very focused, do not disturb." And he'd sent back a single, "Thank you." She knew from the brevity that the board call and the site meeting had both been difficult, and that he was running on the specific kind of tired that comes from a day where everything requires more than it should. He came in and Priya met him at the door and said, in her efficient way, "Sophie's in the back, she's fine. She met Eleanor." And he processed the last part of that sentence on a slight delay. "Eleanor?" he said. "Nora's mother," Priya said, unnecessarily. She consults with us on patient communications now. Thursday is one of her days. He came into the main room. Eleanor was still at the correspondence table, red notebook open, glasses on now, reading. She looked up when he came in. This was the moment Nora had been planning to manage and had not managed, and she watched it happen from across the room with the specific helplessness of events in motion. Adrian stopped. Eleanor looked at him. Something passed between two people meeting for the first time who already know more about each other than strangers normally do. "Mr. Kingsley," Eleanor said. She took off her glasses. "Mrs. Whitfield." He came to the table, held out his hand. She shook it. He sat down across from her, not waiting to be invited, which Nora recognized as the thing he did when he decided someone was worth directness. Nora stayed where she was, at the window with her camera bag, very still. "My daughter tells me you settled the blueberry chocolate chip question," he said. "Half and half," Eleanor said. "It's the only reasonable position." She agreed more easily than she usually agrees. Good proposals tend to land. Eleanor looked at him steadily. "She also showed me her puzzle. She's very precise about the borders. She does the borders first, always. She's decided that's the correct method." "It is the correct method," Eleanor said. "I don't know why people argue about it." Something in Adrian's face eased. Not dramatically. This was not a man who did anything dramatically. But the day's fatigue shifted slightly, made room for something less guarded. "Nora tells me your treatment is going well," he said. "As well as these things go," Eleanor said, "which is better than it was." She looked at him without evasion. "I know the connection to Dr. Reyes came through the foundation. I'm not going to pretend I don't know that or not say thank you." "You don't need to." "I do," Eleanor said with a firmness that was entirely pleasant. "My daughter taught me to say thank you for the things that matter. She learned it somewhere. I assume partly from me, though she'll deny it." She paused. "So, thank you." He received this without deflection, which Nora noted as the thing he'd become better at in 4 months, receiving things directly. "You're welcome," he said, simply. They sat in the quiet of the brownstone for a moment, the early December dark already starting outside the windows, the city going about its evening beyond the glass. "She's remarkable, your daughter," Eleanor said. "I don't say that to all children." "She's something," he said. "She's not easy." "No, she's better than easy." Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "You've done well with her. Alone since she was 2. That's not a small thing." He was quiet. "I had help." "The good kind of help still requires you to show up." He looked at Eleanor. The look he used when he was taking something in, real, full attention. "Nora shows up," he said. It was quiet. Not pointed toward Eleanor's information, just said, existing in the room. Eleanor looked at her daughter across the room by the window. Nora was looking at her camera, or pretending to. Her ears had gone slightly pink. "Yes," Eleanor said. "She does." Sophie appeared from the back office with the announcement that the puzzle was 22% complete and that she needed 15 more minutes, which Adrian granted with the ease of a man who has long since learned that Sophie's time estimates require a multiplier. Sophie went back. Eleanor picked up her notebook. Adrian sat at the correspondence table in the brownstone his wife's foundation ran and looked at the impact wall. The smaller version here, not the gala one, but the same photographs, the same families, and was quiet in the way of someone who is not uncomfortable with quiet. Nora went to the kitchen and made tea. She brought cups back without being asked, set one in front of Adrian, one in front of Eleanor, kept one herself, and sat at the corner of the table. The 3 of them sat and drank tea in the brownstone that smelled like paper and something warm that she'd never identified. And in the back room, Sophie hummed to herself over her puzzle pieces, and Bernard sat on the windowsill watching the street, and it was, in its way, the most ordinary moment that had happened in months. Quietly, unexpectedly ordinary. The kind of ordinary that takes a long time to build and arrives before you realize you've been building it. January came with the particular blunt cold of a New York winter that has stopped being atmospheric and simply is. The city gray and purposeful, everyone moving with their heads down, the holidays gone, and the year properly begun. The Foundation's photography exhibit opened on the 15th. This had been Priya's idea, proposed in early December after she'd seen the full gala set. A dedicated exhibit in the brownstone's front room, the photographs printed and mounted, available to visiting donors and researchers and community partners who came through. Not a gallery show, nothing public-facing on that level, but a real installation, properly lit, the images doing the work Nora had designed them to do. 12 photographs. The lab series, 5 images from Dr. Osei's Boston lab, including the whiteboard, 3 from the brownstone itself, the family letters and the work of the Foundation's daily operations, 2 from the gala program, and 2 portraits, the woman in the audience with her hands flat on the table and Adrian at the edge of the room. The opening was on a Tuesday evening, small by design. Foundation staff, board members, a handful of the research partners, Dr. Osei in from Boston. Nora stood in the corner of the front room and watched people move through the photographs and felt the particular feeling of having made something that existed outside her now, that people were responding to with their own histories, and not just hers. Susan Holt stood in front of the whiteboard photograph for a long time. Then she found Nora. "This is the most honest thing I've seen at a Foundation event in 20 years, she said. "Priya's project," Nora said. "I just took the pictures." "Stop diminishing," Susan said, not unkindly. "You know what you did." "Doctor." Osei stood in front of the whiteboard image with her arms crossed and her chin up and her jaw working slightly, and Nora watched her look at the inscription in the corner, for LK. Keep going. And didn't go over, just let her have it. Eleanor was there. She stood in front of the portrait of the woman with her hands flat on the table and said nothing for a long time. And when she turned away, her expression was composed in the specific way of someone who has composed it on purpose. Adrian arrived late, coming directly from a client meeting, still in his coat. He went through the room methodically, stopping at each image, and Nora watched him from across the room and tried to read what she was seeing. His face in museums was different from his face in the office, more open, less managed, the way faces often are when they're in the presence of things that don't require a response so much as a reception. He stopped in front of his own portrait. He stood there for what was probably 90 seconds, which felt longer. Nora went to him. She stood beside him. They both looked at the photograph, the man at the edge of the room, the unguarded expression, the hope that hadn't known it was being captured. "It's strange," he said, "seeing yourself. Is it a good strange or a bad strange?" He thought about it. "Neither, just true, strangely true." He looked at it for another moment. "I look like I'm expecting something." "You were," she said. He turned to look at her. "What was I expecting?" "I think you were waiting to see if the evening was going to be all right." She held his gaze. "If the Foundation was going to be all right. If you were going to be all right." He was quiet for a moment. "And was I?" "Look at the photograph," she said. He looked. At the open quality of his own face, the thing she'd called hope when he'd asked. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think so." Sophie appeared at his elbow. She'd been brought by Keiko, who was back from Portland, and had already done a full circuit of the room with the executive efficiency she applied to galleries and puzzles and all things she'd decided were worth taking seriously. She took Adrian's hand without looking at him, the unconscious physical tether, and looked at the photograph of him. "That's you," she said. "It is. You look different in it." "How so?" Sophie tilted her head. "Like you're not worried," she said. He looked down at her, then at the photograph, then at Nora, with an expression she didn't take a picture of because some things don't need to be preserved in order to be real. "Nora took it," he told Sophie. Sophie looked at Nora. "You made him look not worried?" "He did that himself," Nora said. "I just noticed it." Sophie considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved. Then she tugged her father's hand in the direction of the lab photographs, which she'd decided she wanted to look at more carefully, and he went with her, and Nora stood in front of his portrait for another moment by herself. She thought about a rainy corner in October, a wallet in a puddle, an $11 blouse and $11.43, and a phone call at 3 a.m. with a nurse named Patricia, who'd had a voice too calm for what she was saying. She thought about what it cost to stay honest when honesty was expensive, about the version of herself she'd been trying to locate, the one who believed that doing the right thing wasn't naive, that integrity wasn't a luxury, and how she'd found her not in some dramatic moment of triumph, but in the slow accumulation of regular days, in a governance proposal, in a lunch with Susan Holt, in a hallway with Graham Voss and steady hands, in a brownstone kitchen with tea and a 6-year-old and a woman who read letters aloud in a clear voice. Behind her, she could hear Sophie explaining something to Adrian about the Boston lab photographs. She'd developed opinions about the equipment, and his responses, patient and specific and genuinely interested in what she was saying. Nora turned from the portrait. Eleanor was nearby, talking to Priya with the focused animation of someone who has found her work. And Dr. Ose was holding a glass of wine and talking to one of the board members with her hands moving in the way of someone who loves what she does. The room was warm, and the photographs were on the walls and outside the brownstone windows. The January city was dark and cold and moving. She thought, this is what it looks like when something comes back. Not perfectly, not all at once, just incrementally, room by room, one honest decision compounding the next. The Foundation's record restored, not to what it had been, but to something better and more durable. Her mother's health stabilizing in small increments that added up to more time. Her camera back in her hands, pointed at things that mattered. Adrian, still learning to receive what was given to him directly without looking for the catch. None of it was finished. None of it was resolved in any final way. Eleanor still had doctor's appointments and medication regimens and days when the dizziness didn't clear until noon. The Foundation still had Marcus Webb on its board, and Graham Voss somewhere in the city making calculations she couldn't predict. Sophie still had days. Nora had come to understand in the months of proximity when something would catch in her in a way that a 6-year-old doesn't have words for yet, when she'd be quieter than usual and hold Bernard with the specific grip of a child looking for something solid. And Adrian still had his evenings alone in an apartment on 73rd Street, still had the photograph of Lily on the wall in his study that Nora had glimpsed once and not mentioned, still had the particular kind of loneliness that is not emptiness but absence, the specific shape of someone who used to be there and isn't anymore and has left the outline of themselves in the space. But there was also this, a brownstone on the Upper West Side on a Tuesday in January, with her photographs on the walls and her mother in the room, and a 6-year-old explaining laboratory equipment to her father in the specific way of someone who has decided the information is important. There was this room, warm inside the cold city, built by a woman who knew how to turn grief into a door. Nora picked up her camera. She took one more photograph. Not for the exhibit, not for the Foundation or the donors or any record that needed keeping, just for herself. The room in January light, the people in it going about the work of existing alongside each other, imperfect and present. She kept it. The letter from Graham Voss arrived on a Wednesday morning in late February, addressed to Adrian personally, delivered through legal counsel in the specific way that means someone has decided to make a thing official before they've decided what the thing actually is. Nora intercepted it the way she intercepted everything that came through the formal correspondence channel, opened it, read it, sat with it for approximately 90 seconds, and then walked to Adrian's office door. He was on a call. She held up 2 fingers, the signal they'd developed over 4 months that meant this can't wait, but it can wait 2 minutes. And he wrapped up the call in 80 seconds, which was faster than usual. She set the letter on his desk. He read it standing. She watched his face. He had gotten better, in 4 months, at not managing his expression around her. Or maybe she had gotten better at reading the management of it. She wasn't sure which. And what she saw now was not anger, not panic. Something colder and more deliberate. The face of someone recalibrating. The letter was 3 pages. The substance of it was this. Graham Voss, through his attorney, was requesting a formal meeting with the Lily Kingsley Foundation Board to discuss what the letter called outstanding obligations and unresolved matters pertaining to the Foundation's operational history. The language was lawyered to within an inch of its meaning, but the meaning was clear enough. Voss wanted back in. Not fully. He wasn't stupid enough to claim a seat at the table, but adjacent, a consultancy arrangement, an advisory role with the research partnerships, something that would rehabilitate his public connection to the foundation he'd stolen from, framed in the letter as an act of reconciliation and closure. Adrian set the letter down. "No," he said. "Obviously," Nora said, "but it needs a response that isn't just no." "Why?" "Because a flat refusal gives him grounds to claim the foundation is operating with personal bias rather than governance principles. He's setting up a position where any rejection can be framed as Adrian Kingsley protecting his territory rather than the board exercising proper oversight." She paused. "You need the board to say no, not you." He looked at her. "You read all 3 pages in 90 seconds. I read fast when something makes me angry." He picked up the letter again, looked at the last page, set it down. He was in the building the night of the gala. He sends this 6 weeks later. He moved to the window. The same city, the same posture she'd first seen him in 4 months ago. He's been watching to see if the foundation held, seeing if there was anything left worth approaching. "Which means the gala worked," Nora said. "The donations, the press, the board ratification. He sees something worth getting close to again. There's nothing for him here." "I know that. The board needs to say it formally." She came to stand near his desk. "Let me draft the response protocol for Camille. We convene an emergency board consultation. Not a full meeting, just a consultation. You present the letter, you recuse yourself from the vote on grounds of personal conflict, and the board issues a formal position, clean, documented, defensible." He turned from the window. "You want me to recuse myself?" "From the vote, not from the room." She held his gaze. "You present the facts. You let the board decide. You give Voss no angle to use." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him working through it, the part of him that wanted to simply refuse, that had 4 years of justified fury behind it, and a letter from a man who had stolen from his dead wife's legacy sitting on his desk, and the other part, the part that had learned slowly and not without difficulty that the smartest response and the most satisfying response were rarely the same thing. "Draft it," he said. She drafted it that afternoon. Camille reviewed it. The board consultation happened the following Tuesday, a video call that lasted 42 minutes. Adrian presented the letter, stated his recusal from the vote, and left the screen while the board deliberated. He sat in the conference room while they deliberated, and Nora sat at her desk and worked on the foundation's quarterly donor report, and neither of them said anything. The board voted 6-1 to issue a formal rejection of Voss's request, with a letter citing the foundation's governance principles and the completion of legal proceedings as grounds for no further engagement. Webb's was the one dissenting vote, which surprised no one and meant less than it once would have, because Webb had 3 votes on a board where he needed 6, and the modified governance structure had made that a permanent condition. The rejection letter went out Thursday morning. Voss's attorney acknowledged receipt Friday afternoon. There was no further correspondence. Adrian came to Nora's desk Friday at 5 o'clock, when the floor had mostly cleared for the weekend, and stood at the corner of her workspace. "It's done," he said. "I know. I mean properly done. Legal says his options are exhausted. He has no standing for any further formal approach." He paused. "It's over." She looked at him. He looked tired. The good kind of tired. The kind that comes from finishing something rather than from carrying it. The kind of tiredness that can actually become rest. "How do you feel?" she said. He thought about it, which was new. The old version of him would have deflected the question. "Like something I've been holding on to is finally heavy enough that I can put it down," he said. "Not light, just settable." She nodded. "That's enough." "I didn't think it would be." He looked at his hands briefly, then at her. "I thought closing it would feel like winning something." "It doesn't?" "It feels like stopping something." He paused. "Which turns out to be what I actually needed." They stood in the Friday quiet of the office, the city below going about its end-of-week business, and Nora thought about all the ways a wound can close. Not cleanly, not without a scar, but enough. The way things become survivable and then livable, and then eventually just part of the geography of who you are. "Go home," she said. "Take Sophie somewhere this weekend. somewhere that has nothing to do with any of this. He looked at her. She wants to go to the Natural History Museum. She's decided she has unresolved questions about dinosaurs. Then go resolve them. He picked up his jacket from the back of her visitor chair where he'd apparently set it at some point during the afternoon without her noticing. He paused at her desk. Nora. He said her name in the specific way he'd developed. Not the professional register, not the way he said names in meetings. The other way. Thank you. For all of it. You say that a lot, she said. You earn it a lot, he said, and left. She sat at her desk for a moment after he was gone. The office was quiet. The cursor on her screen blinked in the patient way of machines that don't need anything. She thought settable, the word he'd used. She turned it over. She'd been carrying things too, she knew, the particular weight of someone who has been surviving for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to simply live. The medical bills that had compressed her into crisis mode for 2 years, the camera she'd put down, the gallery curator she hadn't called back, the version of herself she'd been looking for on a wet October sidewalk. She looked at the camera on the corner of her desk. She picked it up. March arrived, and with it the particular restlessness of a city that has been cold for too long and can feel the change coming even before it arrives. The light shifted. Not warmer yet, but different, the angle of it through the office windows in the morning moving in the incremental way that means something is turning. Eleanor's February echocardiogram came back with results that Dr. Reyes described as encouraging, which she followed with specific numbers that Nora wrote down in the notebook she kept for medical appointments and looked up later on reputable websites to understand what they actually meant. What they meant was the medication was working. The arrhythmia episodes had not recurred. The structural concerns they'd been monitoring had stabilized. Stabilized is not the same as improved, Eleanor said on the phone after the appointment. Stabilized is what we were hoping for, Nora said. 3 months ago, stabilized was not where we were. A pause. Fair, Eleanor said. Dr. Reyes happy? She looked pleased. She has a very contained way of being pleased, like she's been trained not to give people too much hope at once. That's just good medicine. I know. I still find it faintly maddening. Eleanor's voice was dry and warm. Your mother is allowed to want good news delivered with some enthusiasm. You're getting better, Mom. A longer pause, the kind that meant Eleanor was letting herself believe it. Yes, she said quietly. I think I am. They stayed on the phone for a while after that, talking about smaller things. Eleanor's work at this brownstone, which had grown from 3 days a week to 4, and which Priya had formalized in January with a consulting agreement and a title, Patient Experience Advisor, that Eleanor had initially said was too grand and then printed on business cards, which she kept in her coat pocket and distributed with more frequency than strictly necessary. A book she was reading, a neighbor she'd befriended in the building. Small things. The accumulation of small things that constitute a life that is going again rather than managing to continue. After they hung up, Nora sat at her kitchen table with her coffee in the morning light and thought about the specific quality of her mother's voice in that pause. I think I am. And the way it sounded like someone arriving somewhere they'd been trying to reach for a long time. Not triumphant, just present, in a future that had not been guaranteed. She thought about what it cost not to give up on the things you were trying to reach, the patience of it. The daily, unremarkable choice to keep going when keeping going didn't feel like anything in particular. She got her camera, she went out. Well, it was Sophie who asked the question that cracked everything open. This was in late March, on a Sunday, in the kitchen of the apartment on 73rd Street where Nora had become, by some organic and unplanned process, a regular presence. Not every Sunday. She had her own weekends, her own life, her own work, and she was careful about that, careful not to fill a space that wasn't hers to fill. But enough Sundays that Sophie had stopped treating her arrival as an event and started treating it as a condition, the way children treat things that have become reliable. They were doing the puzzle, the 1,000-piece one. Sophie had acquired a new one for her birthday in February, a map of the world in the style of antique cartography, with sea monsters in the oceans and elaborate illustrated continents. They were working on the Atlantic, which Sophie had declared the most interesting ocean because of the monsters. And Adrian was at the kitchen table with coffee and a document he was annotating in his small, aggressive handwriting and occasionally participating in the monster discussion when it required parental input. Sophie was sorting pieces by color, her method, which she'd explained to Nora 3 times, and Nora had now adopted because it was in fact more efficient, when she said, without looking up, "Nora, are you going to stay?" The room didn't go quiet. The puzzle pieces were still spread out. Adrian's pen kept moving across the document, but something shifted in the specific way that rooms shift when a child says the thing that adults have been not saying. Nora looked at Sophie. "I'm here until the Atlantic's finished." "No." Sophie looked up. Her face was entirely clear, entirely direct, the way children's faces are when they're asking the real question rather than the polite version of it. "I mean, are you going to keep staying, like always?" Nora set down the puzzle piece she was holding. From the kitchen table, the sound of Adrian's pen had stopped. "That's," Nora started. "Because I like when you're here," Sophie said. Matter of fact. Not manipulative, not performing, just honest, the way she was always honest, the way she'd been honest since the first conversation about puzzles in the hallway. "And Dad is different when you're here." "Different how?" Nora said, carefully. Sophie tilted her head, thinking. "Less quiet," she said. "Not loud, just less quiet." She picked up a puzzle piece, looked at it, set it in a different pile. "When you're not here, he's still nice, but he's more," she searched for the word, "separate, like he's there but he's behind a wall." The apartment was warm and quiet, and Bernard was on the windowsill watching the street, and the world map was half assembled on the living room floor, with the sea monsters still out to sea. Nora looked at the puzzle for a moment. She could feel Adrian behind her, not moving, not speaking. She didn't look at him. This was Sophie's question, and it deserved Sophie's answer. "I don't know exactly what always looks like," she said honestly, "but I'm not going anywhere, Soph. Is that okay?" Sophie considered this with the gravity she applied to important things. "Yes," she said, "that's good," and went back to sorting puzzle pieces with the executive finality of someone who has gotten what they needed from a conversation. Nora looked down at the Atlantic Ocean in antique cartography. A sea monster in the lower left corner, elaborately illustrated, looked back at her with the specific expression of a thing that has been in the deep water for a long time and is not bothered by it. She heard Adrian get up from the kitchen table. She heard him set his coffee cup in the sink. She heard him come into the living room and sit on the floor on the other side of the puzzle, across from Sophie, and pick up a piece without saying anything. She looked up. He was looking at her. Not the controlled look, not the assessing look, not the look she'd photographed at the gala, which was hope before it knew it was hope. Something that had arrived past all of those, something direct and quiet and entirely without the glass. She held his gaze. "She's right," he said, "for what it's worth." "About which part?" "All of it." He set the puzzle piece down. "You should know that." She thought about what her mother had said in October. "You're careful about money and not careful about people." She thought about how wrong and how right that had been simultaneously, the way true things always are both. "I know," she said. They sat on the floor of the apartment on East 73rd Street with a map of the world between them and Sophie humming something to herself and the March light coming through the windows at the angle that meant the season was genuinely turning, and nothing was announced, nothing was declared, because some things don't require announcement. They require only the willingness to stop pretending they aren't happening. But April brought the board's formal approval of a new foundation initiative, the one Nora had proposed in February, quietly, through a memo to Priya that had become a presentation to the board that had become, after 2 months of revision and legal review, a funded program. It was called the Living Documentation Project, which was a name that had gone through 6 iterations and landed there by committee, which meant nobody loved it and everybody could live with it. The substance of it was this: a dedicated photography and personal narrative program that would document the real experiences of families affected by the neurological cancers the Foundation funded research for, creating a permanent, human-centered record of what the research meant in actual lives. Not statistics, not press releases. Stories. Nora would lead it, Not as an assistant leading a project on the side, as the program director, with a title and a contract and a budget, and Priya as her counterpart across the foundation's operational structure. It was a new thing, neither fully her old life as a photographer nor the administrative work she'd been doing for 5 months, but something that had grown from both, the way things grow when you're not quite watching for them. She'd written the proposal herself, over 3 weekends in February, at her kitchen table with coffee and the city outside and the camera on the table next to the laptop. She hadn't told Adrian she was writing it. She'd given it to Priya first on a Monday morning and said, "Tell me if this is viable before you show it to anyone else." Priya had read it in 2 hours and called her at noon and said, "It's viable. It's more than viable. When can we present it?" The board approved it with one amendment, a slightly larger initial budget than Nora had requested, which was the board's way of saying they believed in it more than she'd asked them to, and the motion passed 5-1. Webb's vote against was not unexpected, and for the first time in the months Nora had been watching the board's dynamics, was also not particularly consequential. 5 votes, and an expanded budget, and a program that was real. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon via a text from Priya that was mostly exclamation points and one sentence of actual information. She was at her desk when it came through. She read it again, set the phone down. She picked up the camera. She took a photograph of her desk, the 2 monitors, the key card, the business card she'd kept in her drawer since October with Camille's number on it, the stack of foundation documents she'd been working through. The specific ordinary landscape of where she'd spent 5 months building something she hadn't known she was building. Adrian came out of his office at 4:30. He stopped at her desk. "Priya called," he said. "I know. You didn't tell me you were writing the proposal." "I didn't want it to be a favor," she said. "I wanted it to be a proposal that stood on its own." He looked at her. "It did." "I know. That's why I didn't tell you." He was quiet for a moment. "This means you'll be splitting your time between here and the foundation." "Yes, we'd need to figure out the coverage for your office. Camille has some thoughts about restructuring the support model so you're not dependent on one person for Nora." He said it with the quiet patience of someone redirecting a conversation that's going in the wrong direction. "I'm not asking because I'm worried about coverage. I'm asking because I want to understand what this means for you." She looked at him. "It means I'm a photographer again," she said. "Properly. With a program and a structure and a real reason." She paused. "And an assistant position that I genuinely loved and that led me here, so I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not leaving. I'm expanding, if that makes sense." "It makes sense," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you." "Are you going to cry?" She blinked. "No." "You look like you might." "I'm not going to cry at my desk, Adrian." "I cried in this office once," he said. "In the early days of the foundation, after the first grants went out. Alone, late at night. But still." She looked at him. He said it plainly, without embarrassment, the way he'd learned to say things that were true, without requiring them to be anything other than true. "I'll probably cry on the subway," she admitted. "That's more appropriate," he agreed, and went back to his office. She cried on the subway. The C train going uptown, crowded enough that nobody noticed, or if they did, they gave it the New York courtesy of strategic non-observation. She cried for about 4 stops, quietly, looking at her phone without seeing it, and then she was done, and she put her phone away and watched the stations go by, and felt, underneath the tears that had already happened, something that was clean and clear and had been waiting a long time to breathe. She told her mother in person that evening at Eleanor's apartment 4 blocks from her own. Eleanor opened the door and took one look at her daughter's face and said, "Tell me." So Nora told her. The whole proposal, the board vote, the budget, the program. Eleanor listened at her kitchen table with her red notebook in front of her and her glasses on and her hands folded. And when Nora finished, Eleanor picked up the notebook and opened it and wrote something in it and closed it. "What did you write?" Nora asked. Eleanor looked at her. "The date," she said simply. "I write down the dates of the days that matter." Nora sat with that. "Mom." "Don't get sentimental. I'm simply keeping records." But Eleanor's eyes were bright in the specific way that meant she was also getting sentimental, and she knew that Nora knew, and neither of them needed to name it. "This is because of the wallet," Eleanor said. "It's because of a lot of things. The wallet started it." "The wallet started something," Nora said. "I don't know if it was this specifically." Eleanor looked at her with the clarity of a woman who has been alive for 61 years and has stopped allowing imprecision in the questions that matter. "If you hadn't returned it, you wouldn't have met him. If you hadn't met him, you wouldn't have taken the job. If you hadn't taken the job, you wouldn't have found Priya and the brownstone and Dr. Osei and the lab and the photograph and all of it." She paused. "One honest decision." "One honest decision," Nora repeated. "Do you know why you made it?" Eleanor said. "The real reason, not the one you told yourself at the time." Nora thought about it. About standing on this corner of 48th and 6th with $2,000 in a wet wallet and $11 in her account and her mother's medical bills in her chest like stones. About the version of herself she'd been afraid no longer existed. "Because I needed to know I was still that person," she said. "The one who did the right thing. I needed to know she hadn't been completely buried under everything else." "And was she?" "No," Nora said. "She was just cold and tired and waiting." Eleanor reached across the table and put her hand over her daughter's. Her hand was warm. Eleanor's hands were always warm, had always been warm, one of the physical constants of Nora's life since before she had words for constants. "She was never gone," Eleanor said. They sat at the kitchen table in the April evening, a mother and daughter with the specific, comfortable weight of people who have been through something real together and are on the other side of it. And the city outside was doing its city things. And somewhere across town, a 6-year-old was probably arguing about the energy of her pancakes. And somewhere in a lab in Boston, a whiteboard said, "Keep going" in dry erase marker that someone had been rewriting faithfully for 4 years. The rainy morning that had started everything was 6 months behind them when Adrian said the thing he'd been not saying. It was a Saturday in April, mild enough that the city had started to open up again. People on stoops, windows cracked, the particular exhale of a place that has been holding itself against cold for months and is finally releasing. Nora was at the 73rd Street apartment. Sophie was at a friend's birthday party for the afternoon. Her first extended social absence in weeks, apparently, as she was in a phase of preferring home to most external engagements, which Adrian had been neither worried about nor dismissive of, just attentive to in the way he was attentive to all of Sophie's phases. He and Nora were in the kitchen. She was editing photographs on her laptop. The first set from the Living Documentation Project, interviews and portraits from a family in Queens whose daughter was in a clinical trial Dr. Osei was running. And he was supposedly reading something but had stopped reading it 10 minutes ago and was looking at the window. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She looked up. "Yes." He set the papers down. The specific gesture of putting something aside because what you're about to say requires both hands free, or something like that. The body making room for the thing the voice is about to do. "The morning I left the wallet," he said, "I've told you part of it. That I wanted to know if ordinary honesty was still possible, that I'd lost faith in it after Voss." He paused. "But there's a part I didn't tell you, that I haven't told anyone." She closed the laptop gently. "Sophie had asked me something the week before," he said. "She was 6, just turned 6. She'd been looking at a photograph of Lily, the one I keep in my study. She looked at it for a long time and then she looked at me and she said, 'Is Mommy why you're sad?'" He stopped. And I told her no. I told her I wasn't sad. And she looked at me with exactly the expression she uses when she knows something isn't fully true and is deciding whether to push it. And she said, "Okay, Daddy, but I think maybe you should try to be less sad, because I think it would be good for both of us." The kitchen was quiet. 6 years old, he said. "Yes," Nora said. She was right, and she was 6. And I didn't know how to be less sad because I'd confused being less sad with forgetting Lily, which I was not willing to do. He looked at his hands. "I went out that morning because I couldn't sleep and I needed to walk. And I had the cash in my wallet because I'd taken it out the day before for a contractor who wanted to be paid in cash. And somewhere between my building and 6th Avenue, I made a choice that I knew was irrational, and did it anyway." He looked at her. "I needed a sign. Not a magical one, just Evidence. That the world still had enough goodness in it to justify being less sad in it, to justify letting Sophie see me try. Nora was very still. And you came back with it, he said, soaking wet, with an $11 blouse and shoes that were falling apart, and you stood in my lobby and said you wanted to give it to someone with a name. And I thought, he stopped. I thought, there she is, the evidence. I wasn't evidence, she said. I was just a person. I know that now, he said. That's the point. You were just a person who made one honest decision, and it turned out that was exactly the evidence the situation required. He paused. I'm sorry for using you as a test. I've said that before. But I want you to know the full reason. It wasn't cynicism. It was desperation. It was a man who had run out of ways to believe in anything trying one more thing. She looked at him across the kitchen table. The April light was coming through the window at the angle that made everything look like it was lit from inside itself, warm and very specific, the light of a day that was genuinely trying. Adrian, she said. Yes. I know, she said. He looked at her. I've known for a while, she said. Not the Sophie part. That's new. But the rest of it, the desperation underneath the test, the man who'd run out of ways. She held his gaze. I could tell from the first meeting, the way you looked when I came into your office. You were looking at me like I was a proof of something, not just a person returning a wallet. Was that, he paused, was that terrible? It was human, she said. Terrible is when you use people without caring about them. You cared before you knew anything about me. You gave me a job. You gave me the gala. You pushed me back toward my camera before I'd done anything to earn it. She paused. Desperate people do strange things, but you were never cruel with it. You were just lost. He looked at her for a long time. I'm less lost, he said, quietly, precisely. The specific understatement of a man who does not exaggerate what is true, but will, when pressed, tell it. I know, she said. I can see it. Can I? He stopped. Yes, she said. He looked at her. I haven't said it yet. I know. She held his gaze. But I know what it is. And the answer is yes. Something in his face. The last of the glass. The last of the careful management of what he allowed himself to feel in the presence of other people, moved. Not dramatically. This wasn't a dramatic man. It moved the way his expression had moved in the photograph at the gala, the way it moved when Sophie was in the room and he forgot for 30 seconds to be careful about what he showed. It moved into something that was just him, without the construction. You're certain, he said, not doubting her, just asking because he was a person who checked his measurements. I've been certain since approximately week 6, she said. I was just waiting for you to get there. That's longer than I realized. You had things to work through. I did. He paused. I'm still working through things. I know, so am I. She looked at him steadily. That's not a reason. That's just being alive. He reached across the table. Not dramatically. He just set his hand on the table near hers, and she put her hand over it. And they stayed like that in the kitchen on a Saturday in April with the light coming through the window and the city going about its business outside, and the particular quiet of a moment that has been earned. Sophie came home at 5:30, still wearing a paper birthday crown that listed slightly to the left and had happy stamped on it in gold letters. She burst through the door the way she always burst through doors, with full commitment, no reserves held back, and stopped when she saw them at the kitchen table. She looked at her father. She looked at Nora. She looked at the configuration of the kitchen, which was the same as it always was, but different in some way that she couldn't name and didn't need to. I had cake, she announced. It was lemon, which I don't prefer, but I was polite about it. Good, Adrian said. Emma's house has a dog. She dropped her bag by the door. A very small one. It tried to eat my shoe. Did it succeed? Nora asked. No, I was firm. She went to the refrigerator, got herself a cup of juice, and came to the table and sat down between them with the naturalness of someone occupying a space that has always been hers. She drank her juice. She looked at the closed laptop, and the papers set aside, and the hands on the table. "You talked," she said. "We talked," Adrian confirmed. "About the thing?" A pause. "What thing?" Nora asked. Sophie looked at her with the patient expression of a child who has been waiting for adults to reach a conclusion they've been able to see for some time. "The thing where you stay," she said simply. Nora looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Nora. "Yes," Nora said. "About that." Sophie drank her juice. "Okay," she said. "Good." As if this were a matter that had been pending for an unreasonable amount of time and was now resolved, and she could move on to other business. "Can we have the pancakes for dinner? I want to try the new ratio." "What's the new ratio?" Adrian said. "More chocolate chips." The blueberries were pulling focus. "Pulling focus?" he repeated. "From the chocolate chips," Sophie said firmly. "It's a balance problem." Nora was already getting up. She went to the cabinet and got out the mixing bowl. She didn't measure the flour. She listened to Sophie explain the new ratio in the specific detail it apparently required, and she made adjustments when told to, and disagreed once about the amount of butter, which she was overruled on, and the kitchen filled with the smell of warm batter and the sound of Sophie's very specific culinary philosophy and Adrian's dry responses to it, and the paper birthday crown tilted further to the left, and eventually fell off entirely, and Sophie didn't notice because she was focused on the batter. The pancakes were, in Sophie's assessment, better than last time. Nora thought they might be. What she understood in the end, and this was not something that arrived in an epiphany, but in the slow accumulation of months, the way understanding usually actually arrives, was that honesty was not a simple thing. It was not a trait you either had or didn't. It was a practice, a repeated daily choice that cost something real each time, that got easier in some ways and harder in others as the stakes grew, as the relationships deepened, as there was more to lose by telling the truth and therefore more reason to tell it anyway. She had returned the wallet because she needed to know she was still the kind of person who returned wallets. She had taken the job because she needed to know she was still the kind of person who could build something. She had gone to Boston and proposed the program and stood in a hallway with Graham Voss and told Adrian things he didn't want to hear and let him tell her things he'd held for years, because she had understood somewhere along the way that honesty was not just about what you admitted to other people, it was about what you admitted to yourself, about what you wanted, about who you were becoming and whether you were willing to become it. The version of herself that had existed before the wallet, the one who'd put the camera down and picked up whatever paid and told herself that was practical rather than afraid, had not been dishonest. She'd been surviving. Survival has its own logic, its own necessity, and she didn't regret it. But she had been, in some important internal sense, not fully telling herself the truth about what she was doing and why. And the wallet on the corner of 48th and 6th, and the wet lobby, and the orchid, and the elevator to the 41st floor, and the man with his back to the window, had forced her into a version of herself that couldn't sustain that small private dishonesty anymore. You couldn't return a wallet for integrity and then go home and lie to yourself about why you'd stopped painting the world with light. That was the thing, she thought. That was the small, human, unglamorous truth of it. You can't be selectively honest. Honesty about the outside things requires honesty about the inside ones. And once you've started, it compounds. The truth you tell in a lobby leads to the truth you tell in a governance meeting, leads to the truth you tell in a hallway. To a man who once betrayed everything you're protecting, leads to the truth you tell at a kitchen table about wanting to stay. It was not magic. It was not a fairy tale. It was just the slow and occasionally painful and ultimately livable work of being a person who tried to see things as they actually were. Adrian was still learning it. Sophie was teaching him without knowing she was teaching him, the way children teach, through the relentless honesty of people who haven't yet learned to edit themselves for the comfort of others. Eleanor was practicing it in her own particular way, at a brownstone on the Upper West Side, writing down dates in a red notebook because she'd decided that honesty required acknowledging which days mattered before you forgot that they did. And Nora was learning it still in the specific way of someone who has had to unlearn the idea that survival and living are the same thing. They weren't the same thing. Survival was the floor. Living was what you did once you'd stopped falling. She was, she thought, on the floor, standing on it, looking up. What? In May, she went back to the corner of 48th and 6th. She didn't plan it. She was walking from a donor meeting in the low 40s up toward the office, and she came out of the meeting and turned north on 6th and was at the intersection before she'd registered where she was going. She stopped. The corner looked the same. Of course it did. Corners don't commemorate themselves. The trash can was there, or one like it. The sidewalk had the same cracks, same puddle-prone geography at the curb. People were moving around her in every direction, the city's permanent choreography of almost collision and successful redirection. She stood there for a moment. She tried to locate what she'd felt that morning in October. The specific weight of it, the $2,000, and the $11 in her mother's $4,000 test, and found that she could remember it clearly but couldn't quite feel it anymore. The way you can remember what a physical injury felt like without feeling it. That seemed right. That seemed like the way things should work. She raised her camera. She took a photograph of the corner. Just the corner. The trash can, the curb, the flow of people. The October morning gray of it made April different by the light. One frame. She looked at it on the screen. She put the camera back in her bag. She walked the rest of the way to the office. She got in the elevator. The doors opened on the 41st floor with the same sound they always made. Camille was at her desk and said, "Your 3 o'clock moved to 3:30, without looking up. Adrian's office door was open the way it was always open. Her desk was there, and the 2 monitors, and the key card, and the camera in its corner, and through the glass wall of the conference room, the city was doing what cities do in May, which is exist in the particular urgent beauty of a place that is always, in some way, beginning again. She sat down. She started work. Outside, the city moved. 11 million people carrying their various weights and hopes and grievances and small daily choices, most of them unremarked, most of them mattering more than anyone would ever know. Somewhere in a lab in Boston, a whiteboard said keep going in the handwriting of a woman who had been doing it for 4 years and would keep doing it for however many more were required. Somewhere on the Upper West Side, Eleanor Whitfield was at a correspondence table with a red notebook, writing down the date of a day she'd decided mattered. And on the 41st floor of a building on Park Avenue, 2 people were doing the ordinary, unremarkable work of being in each other's lives. The kind of work that doesn't look like much from the outside, but is from the inside, the whole thing. One honest decision had made them. Not easily, not without cost, not without the specific human mess of grief and mistrust and old wounds and new fears that are always part of any real thing. But there, present and there.